A genealogy moves with the solemn rhythm of a funeral procession. A man lives, fathers children, sees generations rise after him, and dies. Then another life is counted and another death recorded. The years are astonishingly long, but the ending remains unchanged, until one name breaks the rhythm. Enoch lives 365 years. He walks with God. Then, where death should close his account, Genesis gives a different ending. He was not, for God took him. A human life has vanished from the earth, and the reason is bound to his extraordinary relationship with God. But the first Enoch named in Genesis is not that man. Before the Enoch who walked with God, there was another Enoch, a child born into the family of Cain, the man who murdered his brother. This earlier Enoch did not give his name to a testimony about fellowship with God. His name was given to a city built by his father outside Eden. The two men stand in different lines of Adam's family, and confusing them blurs the deliberate shape of the story. To find the man who vanished, the record must first pass the city that carried his name but belonged to someone else. The trail begins east of Eden, with Cain leaving the presence of the Lord. Cain had been born after humanity's expulsion from the garden. Adam and Eve were already living beyond the place where God had planted trees pleasant to the sight and good for food. The ground from which Adam had been formed was now cursed because of human rebellion. Work would still bring food, but through toil, thorns, and sweat. Mortality had entered the human story. The way back to the tree of life was guarded. Outside the garden, Eve gave birth to Cain and then to Abel. The brothers grew into different forms of labor. Abel kept sheep, Cain cultivated the ground. In time, both brought offerings to the Lord. Cain presented some of the produce of the soil. Abel brought from the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. The Lord regarded Abel and his offering, but Cain and his offering did not receive the same regard. Cain became intensely angry, and his face fell. God addressed him before the violence occurred. "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen?" Cain was told that doing well opened the way to acceptance, but the warning also named the danger gathering close to him. Sin was crouching at the door. Its desire was for Cain, and Cain was commanded to rule over it. The image is one of immediate threat. Sin is presented as something lying in wait, ready to master the person who allows it entrance. Cain was not moving unknowingly toward disaster. He had heard both the warning and the responsibility laid upon him. Then Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose against him and killed him. The first death explicitly narrated after Eden was not the quiet completion of a long life. It was one brother taking the life of another. The ground Adam struggled to cultivate now received Abel's blood from Cain's hand. The Lord confronted Cain. "Where is Abel your brother?" Cain answered, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" His reply attempted to deny knowledge and reject responsibility at the same time. But Abel's death had not disappeared merely because Cain concealed it. God answered, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." That ground now became central to Cain's judgment. He had worked it as a farmer. He had spilled his brother's blood upon it. It had opened its mouth to receive that blood. From then on, when Cain cultivated the soil, it would no longer yield its strength to him. Cain would become a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. The punishment struck directly at his place and occupation. Cain, the worker of the ground, was alienated from the ground's productivity. Cain, a member of the first human household, would live without a settled place assured to him. His act against his brother disordered his relationship to God, family, land, labor, and future. Cain protested that the punishment was greater than he could bear. He understood himself to be driven away from the face of the ground and hidden from God's face. As a fugitive and wanderer, he feared that anyone who found him would kill him. Even here, judgment did not become permission for uncontrolled vengeance. The Lord declared that anyone who killed Cain would suffer vengeance sevenfold. God placed a sign upon Cain so that anyone who found him would not strike him down. Cain's life was therefore preserved, but preservation was not restoration to Eden. The sign protected the condemned man from being killed. It did not undo Abel's murder, return Cain to his former work, or erase the sentence of wandering. Cain would continue to live with the consequence of what he had done. Then he went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. That direction carries the human movement already underway. Adam and Eve had been expelled from the garden. Cain now moved farther into the world beyond it. Eden remained the lost point behind the family, the place of divine provision, human vocation, and direct fellowship ruined by disobedience. Eastward lay life under judgment. The name Nod is related to wandering, the very condition pronounced upon Cain. Cain entered a land whose designation echoed his sentence, yet Genesis immediately places a striking development within that life of displacement. Cain and his wife had a son. They named him Enoch. This is the first person in the Bible to bear that name. He belongs to Cain's line. His grandfather is Adam, his grandmother Eve, and his father the murderer of Abel. His appearance marks the continuation of a family that might have seemed ready to end in bloodshed. Cain had destroyed his brother, but Cain himself had been spared. Now another generation began through him. The birth of a child changes the practical horizon of any household. Cain was no longer presented only as the condemned killer looking backward toward his crime. A son now carried his line forward. The man, sentenced to instability, faced the task of forming a place in which his family could continue. Cain began building a city. At this early point in Genesis, city need not call to mind the vast stone capitals of later kingdoms. It identifies a settled human community, an organized place of habitation. That alone gives the act its force. The fugitive and wanderer established a settlement. The man whose relationship with the ground had been broken undertook to secure a human place upon it. There is tension in the act, but it does not require embellishment. Cain had been told he would be a fugitive and wanderer. In Nod, the land of wandering, he built. The movement is almost defiant in its solidity. From restless judgment toward walls, households, continuity, and a name attached to a place. Genesis does not treat human building as if it could reverse God's sentence. A city may gather people, preserve labor, and give permanence to memory, but it cannot reopen Eden. It cannot silence Abel's blood. It cannot make Cain innocent. Whatever security the settlement provided existed east of the garden and outside the divine presence Cain had left. Cain named the city after his son, Enoch. The name of the child became the name of the settlement. Cain's future was fixed to the next generation, and the city carried that connection in public form. Abel had left no recorded child, and no city bearing his name. Cain, who killed him, now saw his own son's name placed upon the first city mentioned in Scripture. This is how the first Enoch enters the biblical account, not as a solitary man disappearing from the earth, but as Cain's son, bound to a place his father was building. His identity is established by the line that produces him. Cain fathered Enoch, and Cain named the city Enoch. Those two facts belong together. They also prevent a serious confusion. Biblical names recur. The presence of the same name does not make two people the same person, any more than belonging to Adam's wider family places them in the same genealogical branch. Genesis organizes its early history through lines of descent, and those lines carry different sequences of fathers and sons. Identity depends on following the sequence carefully. Cain's Enoch appears near the beginning of Cain's recorded family. The Enoch who will later walk with God belongs to another line and a later generation. One is Adam's grandson through Cain. The other will be counted as the seventh generation from Adam through a separate branch. Between them lies far more than a repeated name. Their narrative settings also point in different directions. The first stands beside a city established after Cain departed from the Lord's presence. The later Enoch will stand inside a genealogy dominated by death, and his distinction will be expressed through a walk with God. The first man's name is attached to Cain's attempt at settlement. The later man's name is attached to a departure no human structure can explain. For now, however, the record remains with Cain's city. This is humanity beyond Eden. Life continues, children are born, names are given, and settlements rise. Divine judgment has not halted human activity. Cain can build even while bearing the consequence of bloodshed. He can become a father even after destroying his mother's other son. He can give his child's name to a place meant to endure. That combination matters. Genesis does not portray the world outside Eden as empty of skill, family, or accomplishment, nor does visible accomplishment prove that the rupture with God has been healed. A city can rise while its founder remains a man who went away from the Lord's presence. Continuity is possible without reconciliation. Human beings can create permanence around themselves, while the deepest loss remains unresolved. Cain's city therefore becomes more than a geographical marker in the family record. It reveals the conditions under which the earliest generations will unfold. People will not simply wait for death in a ruined world. They will marry, bear children, organize communities, develop forms of work, and leave names behind. At the same time, the violence released in the field with Abel will continue to cast its shadow across Cain's house. The first Enoch belongs to that beginning. His life ensures that Cain's line proceeds, and his name gives Cain's settlement an identity beyond Cain himself. Yet he is not the answer to the mystery with which the genealogy will later confront us. Nothing in his introduction belongs to the extraordinary ending promised by the name Enoch. Here, the emphasis falls on birth, descent, and a city. The distinction must remain firm as the family expands. Otherwise, Cain's departure from God and the later Enoch's walk with God collapse into one confused biography. The contrast depends on recognizing two men, two places in the generations, and two entirely different biblical notices. So the first Enoch remains where Genesis first places him, the son of Cain, his name set over a city east of Eden. The man who walked with God must be found along another branch of Adam's family. From Cain's son Enoch, the line moved forward. Enoch fathered Irad. Irad fathered Mehujael. Mehujael fathered Methuselah. Methuselah fathered Lamech. Genesis passes quickly across these generations. Their names preserve the descent from the murderer in the field to a man whose household will display both human creativity and deepening violence. The city Cain began is followed by a family increasingly capable of shaping life beyond Eden. Its members learn to manage animals, make music, and work metals. Human beings adapt to the world of difficult ground and mortal bodies. But the culmination of Cain's genealogy is not a tool, a song of celebration, or a settlement at peace. It is Lamech announcing that he has killed a man and invoking Cain's protection to magnify his own vengeance. Before that declaration, Lamech makes a decision that changes the structure of his household. He takes two wives. The first is named Ada, the second is Zillah. The notice is brief, but it is a significant departure from the marriage presented at creation. In Eden, God formed one woman for the man, and the two became one flesh. Lamech is the first person Scripture identifies as taking two wives. The line that began with Cain's assault upon his brother now introduces another violation of the pattern established before humanity's exile. The family nevertheless becomes a center of remarkable development. Ada gives birth to Jabal. He becomes the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. The expression "father of" identifies him as the founder or defining ancestor of a way of life. The achievement associated with Jabal is more than possessing a few domesticated animals. His descendants are characterized by mobile dwelling and the organized keeping of herds. Tents make movement possible. Livestock provide renewable resources and movable wealth. Together, they offer an answer to the demands of survival in a land where households must find pasture and sustain themselves beyond a single cultivated plot. Abel had been a keeper of sheep, so animal husbandry was already present in the first generation outside Eden. Jabal's distinction lies in the established pattern attached to him: tent dwelling joined to livestock keeping as an enduring form of life. An earlier occupation becomes a developed social tradition. This way of living required attention to animals, land, and movement. Herds consume what a region provides, and their keepers must respond to changing conditions. A permanent city is not the only human answer to instability. Cain had built a settled place and named it after his son. Jabal's legacy is carried by people whose dwellings can travel with them. Within the same family line, two strategies for living in the post-Eden world now stand side by side. One fixes a name to a city. The other makes a home that can be moved. Both demonstrate humanity's capacity to organize life under difficult conditions. Neither removes those conditions. Herding and shelter can sustain a household, but they do not lift the curse from the ground or return the family to the garden. Ada also gives birth to Jubal, Jabal's brother. Jubal becomes the father of all who play the lyre and pipe. Music enters the recorded development of human culture through Cain's descendants. The lyre represents stringed music, the pipe, wind music. Jubal's legacy reaches beyond the immediate needs of food and shelter. Human beings do not live by subsistence alone. They form sounds deliberately, create rhythm and melody, and establish musical practices that others inherit. The record gives these arts a place among the foundational occupations of the early world. Jabal's descendants become known for tents and livestock. Jubal's become known for instruments. One branch manages the conditions of mobile life, another gives that life music. The biblical account does not detach such skill from ordinary human history. Music does not descend from an imaginary race untouched by the family's troubles. It arises within Cain's line. The descendants of the first murderer are genuine makers and innovators. Their ancestry does not prevent intelligence, discipline, or artistic achievement. That fact makes the portrait of this household more demanding. It cannot be reduced to a simple division in which one family possesses every useful gift and another possesses none. Cain's descendants build and discover. They create forms of life that will become recognizable features of human civilization. Their work answers real needs and produces real beauty. Yet accomplishment is not the same as moral healing. The ability to master a craft does not mean that its maker has mastered sin. The warning given to Cain still hangs over his descendants. Sin desires to rule, and human power may grow without human violence diminishing. Zillah, Lamech's other wife, gives birth to Tubal-Cain. He becomes a forger of every cutting instrument of bronze and iron. With Tubal-Cain, human skill reaches into the earth itself. Metal must be found, separated, heated, shaped, and turned toward a purpose. The description identifies a specialized craft rather than the casual use of what lies ready at hand. Tubal-Cain works bronze and iron, producing implements through knowledge of materials and controlled force. The phrase can refer broadly to tools or instruments fashioned from metal. Such objects could transform daily labor, Metal edges affect cutting, building, cultivation, and many other tasks on which settled and mobile communities depend. The ground that resists humanity also contains materials humanity learns to work. The development is especially striking in Cain's line. Cain had once worked the soil, only to be sentenced to diminished returns from it. Generations later, Tubal Cain's craft draws material from the earth and reshapes it. The family has not escaped the world of hard labor. It has become increasingly skilled at meeting that world with technique. Fire, force, and practiced judgment allow raw material to become a useful instrument. The achievement requires control. Heat must be directed. Metal must be worked rather than merely struck. A craft emerges through repeated knowledge that can be taught, preserved, and extended. Here again, the family's progress carries more than one possibility. A sharpened instrument can serve work, and metalworking can increase a community's ability to build and provide. Human skill gives objects their immediate purpose. The record soon places this technological achievement beside Lamech's violent speech, making the moral tension impossible to ignore without claiming that Tubal Cain's craft itself caused Lamech's crime. The same household can produce pastoral organization, music, metalwork, and a killer's boast. Culture and violence are not presented as opposites that cannot occupy the same place. They grow together in Cain's genealogy. Tubal Cain has a sister named Naamah. She is the only daughter explicitly named in this brief account of Cain's descendants. Her presence completes the listed children of Lamech's two households, Jabal and Jubal through Ada, Tubal Cain, and Naamah through Zillah. The family has now been described through marriages, births, occupations, and inventions. It appears established and productive. Cain's fear of having no secure place has yielded, across the generations, to a line marked by settlement, portable wealth, artistic tradition, and technical knowledge. Then Lamech gathers the family's story into a song of blood. He addresses his two wives by name, Ada and Zillah. Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. The repeated command demands attention. This is not a private thought or an accusation dragged into the open by God. Lamech himself announces what he has done. Cain answered God's inquiry about Abel with denial. Lamech calls witnesses to hear his declaration. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. The song turns an injury into a death. Whatever wound Lamech received, his response is lethal. The lines balance the offense against the retaliation, and the imbalance is severe. A strike answered by killing. His speech reveals how far violence has traveled since Cain stood in the field. Cain's murder followed anger and divine warning. Afterward, he tried to conceal the crime. Lamech speaks of killing as an act to be proclaimed before his wives. Bloodshed has become material for self-assertion. He continues, if Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Cain had feared being killed by anyone who found him. God answered that fear by placing a sign upon him and declaring sevenfold vengeance against his killer. The protection restrained others from taking Cain's life. It established that judgment belonged to God, even in the case of a murderer. Lamech takes that divine protection and turns it into a personal claim. He does not speak as a frightened fugitive begging that his life be spared. He speaks as a man, magnifying the consequences of crossing him. Cain's sevenfold protection becomes Lamech's 77-fold threat. The numbers express escalation. Lamech places himself beyond Cain, as though his own life demands a vengeance vastly greater than the protection God declared for his ancestor. He appropriates the language of divine judgment without the humility of Cain's fear. The result is a boast in disproportionate retaliation. Cain had killed his brother and then discovered that he could not control the consequences. Abel's blood cried from the ground. Cain lost his work and place. His protection came by God's decision, not his own strength. Lamech now speaks as though the lesson of Cain were that violence can secure a man's position if the threatened response is terrifying enough. The difference marks a grim development. Cain succumbed to sin despite being warned to master it. Lamech makes mastery look like the ability to destroy anyone who harms him. The moral command has been inverted. Instead of ruling over the impulse toward violence, he presents violence as the means by which he will rule. His song also brings the achievements of the household under a shadow. Lamech's sons have extended human control over movement, animals, sound, and metal. Their father seeks control over danger through vengeance. The family can make portable homes, instruments, and tools, yet its patriarch announces a social order governed by the threat of multiplied bloodshed. Nothing in the song honors Abel, whose killing began this trajectory. Nothing acknowledges the restraint contained in Cain's mark. Lamech remembers Cain only to surpass him. The ancestors' punishment and protection become a formula for intimidation. By the end of Cain's recorded line, human beings have grown more capable, but violence has also become more articulate. It has acquired a voice confident enough to sing about itself. The murderer in the field tried to evade responsibility. His descendant turns killing into a claim of honor and security. That is the final sound Genesis preserves from Cain's branch. Lamech commanding Ada and Zillah to listen while he celebrates retaliation without limit. Cain's city remains. His descendants have established ways of living that will outlast the brief genealogy. Herds move with tents. Music sounds from strings and pipes. Metal yields to the forge. But the line's last spoken words reveal a household in which a wound can become a killing and divine protection can be distorted into a human threat. The family has learned to shape much of the world around it. It has not learned to break the rule of violence first unleashed between two brothers. Beyond Cain's household, Adam and his wife had another son. Eve named him Seth, saying, "God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him." Her words returned to the wound at the center of the first family. Abel had not simply died, Cain had killed him. The passage of years and the growth of Cain's descendants had not changed that truth. Whatever cities rose or crafts developed, the line of Cain could not give Abel back to his mother. Now Eve received Seth as an act of divine provision. His name is linked to her declaration that God had appointed, placed, or granted another child in Abel's stead. She did not speak as though Seth were Abel restored. He was another son, with his own life and place in the family. But his birth answered the emptiness left by Abel's murder. A future had opened where violence had torn one away. The word Eve used for offspring also carries the larger force of seed or continuing descent. Seth therefore entered the account as more than consolation within one grieving household. Through him, another branch of Adam's family could begin. Cain was alive, protected from vengeance, and surrounded by descendants. Yet Eve did not describe Cain's flourishing house as the answer to Abel's loss. Cain was the one who had created that loss. Seth's birth marked a new beginning alongside the line that had gone east and built its future there. The contrast is quiet at first. Seth did not enter with a city bearing his name. No invention or occupation was attached to his birth. His significance was stated through the mother who held him. God had appointed another offspring in place of the righteous brother who had been struck down. That declaration placed Seth within a history of both human violence and divine continuance. Cain had exercised the power to kill, but he had not gained authority over the whole future of Adam's house. One line had been broken, God permitted another to grow. Murder had altered the family permanently, but it did not bring the human story to an end. Eve had known the exhilaration of Cain's birth. She had also lived through the conflict between her sons, the death of one and the banishment of the other. When Seth arrived, her words were more measured than triumphal. She named what had happened, named what had been lost, and attributed the new child to God. That sequence gives Seth's birth its emotional and theological weight. The family's hope did not rest on pretending the past had been repaired. Abel remained dead. Cain remained his killer. Seth was a gift within the consequences, not an erasure of them. He also stood at the beginning of a line that would make the titles Enoch possible, that future remained generations away, but the route toward it opened here with a child described as appointed by God. The distinction between the two branches of Adam's family now became structural. Cain's genealogy had already reached Lamech and his children. It had displayed human organization and cultural achievement, then ended its recorded speech with a boast of escalating revenge. Seth's line began with no boast. It began with Eve acknowledging dependence. Cain had founded his settlement after leaving the presence of the Lord. Seth's appearance was interpreted by his mother as something the Lord had done for her. One family sought endurance through construction, technique, and threatened retaliation. The other was introduced through a birth received as divine provision. That does not turn every descendant in either branch into a simple moral symbol. The account is tracing families, not inventing two different kinds of human being. Both lines belong to Adam's house. Both live outside Eden. Both inherit the conditions of a world in which the ground is cursed and death has entered. Yet Genesis places their defining notices beside one another so that the direction of each branch can be recognized. Cain's recorded line concludes with Lamech claiming 77-fold vengeance. The next words announce Seth's birth. The transition itself is a reversal. The narrative moves from a man magnifying his own power to a woman crediting God for the continuation of her family. Seth grew and became a father. A son was born to him, and he named the child Enoch. The generations had begun again. Adam, then Seth, then Enoch. Seth, who had been appointed in the place left empty by Abel, now had offspring of his own. The alternative branch was no longer represented by one child alone. It possessed continuity. The name Enoch is a word for a human being, and often carries the sense of humanity in its frailty. It fits the world into which this child was born. Human ingenuity was increasing, but human beings remained creatures of dust, living beyond the garden and under the approach of death. A city could seem permanent. A family name could pass through generations. Metal could be made durable. The people who built, named, and forged remained mortal. With Enoch, the family line reached a moment Genesis considered important enough to mark in a different way. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. The notice reaches beyond a single private act. It indicates the beginning of an identifiable human practice. In the days associated with Enoch, people began invoking the Lord by name. To call upon the name of the Lord is language used throughout Scripture for approaching God in worship, prayer, proclamation, and dependence. It is more than an awareness that God exists. Cain had spoken with God. Lamech had referred to Cain's divine protection. Neither event was described in this way. Calling upon the Lord's name means deliberately turning toward him, acknowledging who he is and seeking him as God. The wording does not place human beings in control of the divine. A name in the biblical world reveals identity and makes address possible, but invocation is not mastery. Those who call on the Lord confess the reverse. They need the God whom they address. That dependence suits the name Enoch. Humanity is frail, and frail humanity begins to call upon the Lord. The development answers the world around it more meaningfully than another tool could. Tents can shelter a family, herds can feed it, music can order sound, metal can strengthen labor. None of them can restore fellowship with the Creator. Here, the human response is directed toward God Himself. This is the first time Genesis announces such a practice among people. Earlier, Abel and Cain had brought offerings. God had addressed Adam, Eve, and Cain. Now, invocation of the Lord becomes a recognizable feature within the unfolding generations. The divine name used here is the covenant name by which the God of Israel would be known. In this primeval setting, long before Israel existed as a nation, Genesis identifies the one being invoked as the Lord, the same God who created humanity, judged rebellion, heard Abel's blood, and appointed Seth. The worship beginning in Enoch's time is therefore connected to the God already active in the story, not to an unnamed power within nature. That matters in a world where human beings were rapidly learning to organize what they could see and touch. Livestock, music, and metals could be observed, handled, and transmitted as skills. The Lord could not be reduced to any of them. Calling upon His name recognized that the world and human life remained under a sovereignty greater than human technique. The act also introduced a different kind of legacy. Cain gave Enoch's name to a city. Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain became associated with enduring human practices. Lamech preserved his violence in verse. In the time of Enoch, people began a practice defined by address to God. What would pass forward was not only a place, craft, or threat, but worship. This did not transport Seth's family back into Eden. Calling upon the Lord began east of the guarded garden, among people still living with the consequences of Adam's disobedience. Divine fellowship now took shape in a world where immediate access to the garden had been lost. That setting gives the practice much of its force. Worship did not arise because human conditions had become easy. It arose under conditions of exile, hard labor, family grief, violence, and mortality. People called upon the Lord from within the damaged world they inhabited. Nor was the need for God answered by the simple continuation of generations. Seth's birth had given Eve another child. Enoch's birth had given Seth a son. The family could now look forward through descendants. But biological continuity alone was not the same as walking rightly before God. Cain's line had already proved that a family could continue and prosper while violence deepened within it. Something more than survival was required. The invocation of the Lord's name supplied the defining movement. Seth's branch did not merely exist alongside Cain's. In Enoch's day, human voices began turning openly toward the God from whom Cain had gone out. The juxtaposition changes the meaning of everything that has just unfolded. Lamech had ordered his wives to hear his voice. Now people call upon the name of the Lord. Lamech's song centered on the power of his retaliation. Invocation centered attention beyond the human speaker. His words promised death to anyone who injured him. Their words sought the God who had forbidden unrestrained vengeance. Two kinds of speech now stand within the same generation-spanning account. One declares what a violent man will do. The other appeals to God. One enlarges the speaker's name and protection. The other names the Lord. This is the first clear spiritual direction assigned to Seth's emerging line. The line began through a child received as God's appointment. It continued through a son whose lifetime became associated with calling upon God. The pattern does not yet reveal the man who will vanish, but it establishes the path on which his life can be understood. The phrase, "walked with God," will eventually distinguish Enoch from the generations around him. That relationship does not appear without a human history behind it. Before one man's entire life is summarized as a walk with God, people begin to invoke God by name. Seth's household thus forms the earliest recorded setting for a line oriented toward divine fellowship. There is no need for a city to mark this beginning. It is located in time. When Enoch was born, people began to call upon the Lord. The practice itself is the monument. Cities can be abandoned, instruments can fall silent, metal can corrode. A name called upon in faith belongs to a different order of endurance. It connects mortal people to the living God. That connection will become decisive because the world remains governed by the consequence announced to Adam. Seth has replaced neither Adam nor Abel. Enoch has not removed human frailty. Worship has begun, but mortality still waits over every household. The family has received a new son, then a grandson. Its response is no longer described through exile or retaliation. Human voices rise toward the Lord. From this point, Genesis is ready to follow that line by name. The record now changes its pace. Individual scenes give way to a written line of descent. This is the book of the generations of Adam. The phrase signals more than a list of names. It gathers the human family into an ordered account, preserving who came from whom as time moves forward. The story will now be measured through births, years, children, and the completed spans of human lives. Each entry will carry the line farther from Eden and closer to the world of Noah. It begins by looking back to creation. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Before the genealogy identifies any human father, it identifies humanity's creator. Adam did not originate the line he now heads. His own life came from God, and the defining dignity of human beings came from the likeness God gave them. Genesis had already unfolded that creation in action. God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The man became a living creature. But dust alone did not define him. God created humanity in his own image and gave human beings a place within the ordered world, with responsibility over the creatures of sea, sky, and land. The genealogy returns to that beginning because everything that follows depends upon it. The people whose years are about to be counted are mortal, yet they are not insignificant. They bear a likeness received from God. Violence can desecrate human life, but it cannot make that life worthless. Death can end an earthly span, but it cannot rewrite humanity's origin. The blood crying from the ground had already demonstrated the seriousness of that truth. Abel's murder mattered because a brother's life was not Cain's possession to take. Lamech's boast was appalling because the men he treated as objects of revenge also belonged to the humanity God had made. Human corruption will grow, but it will grow among creatures whose created status makes that corruption a profound betrayal. The record then repeats the full scope of God's act. Male and female, he created them. The generations will be traced through fathers and sons, but the genealogy does not present humanity as male alone. From the outset, male and female together stand within God's creative purpose. The distinction between them belongs to creation, and both share the human identity God established. God blessed them. The blessing preceded all the births now about to be counted. It was God who commanded humanity to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and exercise its appointed rule. Every new generation unfolds within that original gift and commission. Even outside Eden, even after disobedience and judgment, the family continues to multiply. This continuity is a form of mercy. Adam and Eve had been warned that eating from the forbidden tree would bring death. They were expelled from access to the tree of life. Yet human life did not end in the garden on the day of their transgression. Children were born. Those children formed households. Generations began to fill the earth. The blessing had not been withdrawn, though it now operated in a world marked by pain, toil, conflict, and mortality. Birth and death would stand together in the genealogy. Each new child would show the continuance of humanity. Each completed life would show that the judgment announced in Eden remained active. God also named them Adam when they were created. The name can designate the individual man, but it is also the Hebrew word associated with humankind. Here it embraces male and female under the human identity God gave them. Before Adam named his wife Eve, before parents named sons, and before Cain attached Enoch's name to a city, God named humanity. Naming in Genesis often expresses recognition and authority. Adam had named the animals as part of his appointed vocation. Cain named a city after his child. Eve named Seth in response to God's provision. Yet the first and highest naming belongs to the Creator. Humanity receives its identity before it begins assigning names within the world. That order places limits around every human claim. Cain could build a city, but he could not redefine the nature of its inhabitants. Lamech could announce extravagant vengeance, but he could not make human life his absolute property. Parents could name their children, but those children entered a humanity God had already named and blessed. The genealogy therefore begins with three divine acts. God made humanity in his likeness, created humanity male and female, and blessed and named them. The list that follows is anchored in God's initiative. Then the focus moves to Adam as a father. Adam was 130 years old when he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. The wording deliberately echoes creation. God made Adam in God's likeness. Adam then fathered Seth in Adam's likeness and image. Human life passes from one generation to the next through a resemblance that reaches backward from child to parent and beyond the parent to the Creator. Seth was truly Adam's son. He belonged to him physically and genealogically. The language of image includes the recognizable continuity of human nature from father to child. Seth was not a new creation unrelated to the history before him. He received life through Adam and entered Adam's condition. That condition now included far more than the original dignity of creation. Adam was the man who had disobeyed God's command. He lived outside the garden, worked cursed ground, and carried the sentence of mortality. A son in Adam's likeness inherited human life as it now existed east of Eden. The echo is therefore both majestic and sobering. God's image has not vanished from humanity, but Adam passes life onward as a fallen father. Seth belongs to a race still marked by divine likeness and now subject to death. The genealogy will not allow either truth to cancel the other. Human beings are not worthless because they die, and they are not untouched by judgment because they bear God's image. Their dignity explains the gravity of their rebellion. Their mortality reveals its consequence. Seth's birth at Adam's 130th year also establishes the chronological structure that will govern the line. The account gives the father's age when the named son is born, then the years that follow, the presence of additional children, and the total span of the father's life. These numbers connect generations that might otherwise seem like isolated names. They place fathers and sons within overlapping lives. The early family is not presented as a chain in which one generation disappears before another begins. Parents remain while children mature, establish households, and become parents themselves. At 130, Adam saw the birth of the son, whose line the record would follow. Seth's place had already been interpreted by Eve as an appointment from God after Abel's death. Here, his position becomes genealogically exact. He is the named son through whom Adam's descent will proceed toward Enoch and beyond. This does not make Seth Adam's only child. After Seth was born, Adam fathered other sons and daughters. The family extended beyond the selected names. The genealogy follows one line because that line leads somewhere essential, not because no other people existed. Sons and daughters filled Adam's remaining centuries. They formed the wider human household from which later families grew. This detail also explains how humanity could expand from its first parents without requiring the narrative to pause over every marriage and birth. Genesis names the people necessary to carry its chosen line while acknowledging the larger family around them. The unnamed children are not treated as unreal or unimportant. Their existence is stated plainly. But the record is selective. It follows Seth because through Seth will come Enoch, and through that branch will eventually come the Enoch, whose relationship with God interrupts the established human ending. That destination remains far ahead. At this point, Seth is first a son in Adam's image, one child among a growing number of sons and daughters. His future significance is contained in the line, not yet displayed through any extraordinary act of his own. After fathering Seth, Adam lived another 800 years. The scale of the life is difficult to absorb because it stands far beyond ordinary experience. 8 centuries follow the birth of the named son. The family grows through generations while Adam remains alive within it. Adam's lifespan binds the early human story together. He is not merely a remote ancestor known only by tradition to descendants many generations removed. His life stretches across the emergence of a broad household. The man associated with the garden remains present as the world beyond it develops. This long overlap gives weight to the idea of generations. Seth's branch does not grow in isolation from its beginning. Adam lives while the family expands. The origin of human exile, labor, and mortality stands within reach of later members of his house through the continued presence of the first man. The 800 years are not described through a sequence of public achievements. Adam's entry is structured around fatherhood and duration. He fathers sons and daughters, and time accumulates. That restraint directs attention to what the genealogy once counted. Cain's line had been distinguished through a city and specialized forms of work. Adam's line through Seth is presented through succession, one life giving rise to another, while the years move steadily toward a boundary no amount of longevity can abolish. Adam's total years came to 930. The number gathers his entire earthly span into one measure, the years before Seth's birth and the 800 that followed. It is the longest life yet assigned a number in the biblical record, and one of the longest anywhere in its pages. Yet the magnitude of the number does not restore what was lost in Eden. 930 years remain countable. However vast the span, it has an edge. The man created from dust has not become independent of the judgment attached to dust. Longevity can delay the moment. It cannot transform the human condition. That is the tension the genealogy will now repeat with unrelenting clarity. A son is born, more children follow, centuries pass, and still each life moves toward the sentence given after rebellion. For Adam, those 930 years encompass an extraordinary reversal. He began within a garden planted by God and ended his counted span in the world outside it. He had known the provision of Eden before working resistant soil. He had received the command before violating it. He had heard the judgment before watching its consequences spread through his family. Within those years, one son killed another. The killer went away and built a city. Another son was given, and from that son came a grandson whose generation began calling upon the Lord. Human culture advanced. Worship emerged. Violence escalated. Children and grandchildren multiplied. Adam's life contains all of it. But the genealogy does not allow the abundance of events or the immensity of years to obscure the direction in which his count is moving. The record has established humanity's high origin, reaffirmed God's image, preserved the blessing, and traced life from father to son. It has also brought the first man to the full measure of his days. The line is ready to move beyond him, and the final consequence announced outside Eden is about to enter the genealogy as its governing refrain. Then Adam died. The first numbered life in the genealogy closes with those three words. 930 years have been gathered into a single account, but their length does not change their destination. The man who received life when God breathed into him has reached the judgment spoken over him after Eden. He returns to the dust from which he was taken. This is the first death from age recorded in the human family. Abel's life had ended through murder, his blood crying from the ground after Cain struck him down. Adam's ending comes without an attacker. Time itself carries the sentence forward. The body formed from the ground completes its years and returns to it. Death now becomes more than a warning remembered from Eden or a violence one person inflicts upon another. It enters the genealogy as the ordinary conclusion of a human life. The account has numbered Adam's years precisely because even a lifespan of extraordinary length can be spent. Every year added to the total brings him nearer to the same boundary. His death also changes the human household. Until this moment, every generation had lived in a world where the first man was still alive. Adam's children, grandchildren, and later descendants shared the earth with the ancestor from whom their family began. His life extended across centuries of expansion, work, worship, and conflict. Now, the living link to the first moment of human creation is gone. The family continues, but no longer with Adam among them. The man who stood at its earthly beginning has become its first patriarch to receive the genealogy's full closing formula. His descendants inherit a world he entered before any of them, a world made by God, damaged by disobedience, and still sustained long enough for children to outlive their fathers. Seth is the named son who carries the line beyond Adam's death. His life had begun when Adam was 130 years old. He entered the family after Abel's murder and Cain's departure, received by Eve as the child God appointed in Abel's place. He grew while Adam remained alive, and for centuries father and son belonged to the same widening household. When Seth reached 105 years of age, he fathered Enoch. The birth moved the selected line into its third named generation: Adam, Seth, and Enoch. Seth had once embodied the continuation of a family shattered by violence. Now he became the father, through whom that continuation advanced again. His 105 years before Enoch's birth were only the opening portion of his life. In the scale of this genealogy, fatherhood did not signal the approach of old age. It began a long period in which Seth would see his son mature while Adam still lived, and while more members were added to the family. The chronology makes their overlap remarkable. When Enoch was born, Adam was 235 years old. The first man would live another 695 years. Enoch therefore grew, became an adult, and passed through most of his own long life while his grandfather Adam remained alive. The genealogy's succession is not a relay in which one man disappears as soon as the next is born. It is an accumulating household. Named generations stand beside one another across centuries. The line stretches forward without immediately losing those behind it. That accumulation gives Seth a particular position. He is both son and father for most of his recorded years. Behind him stands Adam, the origin of the human line. Before him stands Enoch, through whom the line will continue. Seth occupies the middle, receiving life from one generation and passing it to another. This is how the genealogy answers destruction, through continuance that violence did not create and could not entirely prevent. Cain removed Abel from the family's future. Seth did not undo that act, but through Seth another future took form. Enoch's birth made it clear that this branch would not end with Eve's replacement son. After Enoch was born, Seth lived another 807 years. Those centuries carry his household far beyond a single father and son relationship. Seth fathered other sons and daughters. The family widened around the named line. just as Adam's had widened after Seth's birth. The account preserves Enoch because the genealogy will pass through him. The other children confirm the larger growth taking place around that path. Seth's legacy was not confined to the one name required to connect Adam with later generations. His life produced a broad family whose members belonged to the expanding population beyond Eden. With every birth, God's blessing of fruitfulness continued under conditions Adam's rebellion had changed. Children entered a world where food came through labor, where conflict could become murder, and where death now stood in the family's own memory. Yet life continued to appear within that world. Seth's later sons and daughters also reveal the scale hidden behind the genealogy's selected names. A listener might hear Adam, Seth, and Enoch as though only 3 people occupied the line. In reality, each named father stands amid a growing network of siblings, marriages, households, and descendants. The genealogy is narrow because it is leading toward a particular person and future, not because the human world remained small and empty. As Seth's family expanded, Adam's death became the first great generational transfer in the numbered record. Seth had lived 800 years before losing his father. By then, he was ancient by any later human measure, yet he still had 112 years remaining. For most of Seth's life, Adam had been present. For Seth's final century, he was not. That interval matters because the line now advances under a descendant's responsibility. Adam is no longer the living head of the family. Seth, the son in Adam's likeness, becomes the oldest named figure, still carrying the selected branch. Nothing about that change releases him from Adam's condition. Succession transfers place within the family, not freedom from mortality. Seth can outlive his father, guide a household, and see later generations multiply, but he cannot step outside the pattern Adam's death has revealed. The passing years make that increasingly clear. Seth's total life reaches 912 years. His span is 18 years shorter than Adam's, though still immense. The difference between 930 and 912 may seem small beside the brevity of later life, but the genealogy records both totals exactly. Each man has his appointed measure. Neither possesses endless time. Seth's 912 years contain a quieter history than Cain's recorded branch. No city is named for him. No specialized craft is attached to his children in this entry. No violent song closes his household. The account measures his life through descent. He fathers Enoch, then other sons and daughters, and his years accumulate. That quietness does not make his role slight. Seth holds the line together after the first family's catastrophe. His importance lies in continuity, faithfully preserved from generation to generation. Through him, the branch associated with calling upon the Lord remains in the world. His life also shows how much can happen without changing the fundamental human ending. Seth experiences fatherhood, the multiplication of his family, the growth of several generations, and the death of Adam. He lives another century beyond his father. Still, every one of those events takes place inside a lifespan moving toward completion. The genealogy's form allows no achievement, grief, or length of years to distract from that movement. It does not need to describe the gradual weakening of age or the final circumstances of death. The total itself approaches its limit. Once the years have been counted, the closing words follow. For Seth, that closure carries special force. He had been given in place of a brother who died violently. His birth declared that death would not immediately terminate Adam's family. But being appointed after Abel did not make Seth deathless. He could continue the line. He could not rescue it from Adam's sentence. That distinction prevents hope from being placed in biological succession alone. A new child can answer bereavement with new life. A son can preserve a family name. Descendants can multiply across centuries, but no generation, simply by producing another, defeats the grave. It only carries human life forward until another person reaches the same boundary. Seth's story therefore contains both preservation and limitation. God provided him. Through him came Enoch. Through Enoch, the selected genealogy would continue. The family survived Cain's violence and Adam's death. Yet Seth remained a mortal man, bearing the likeness of his mortal father. His long overlap with Adam reinforces this shared condition. Seth could have known the man whose life began with divine breath, and he watched that life end. Adam's death was no distant report from an age beyond memory. It occurred within Seth's own span. Then Seth continued living. Years passed after Adam's count stopped. Children and later descendants remained active. The family did not collapse when its first ancestor died. The line proved capable of surviving loss, just as Seth's birth had proved it capable of surviving Abel's murder. But survival came through those who would themselves be lost. That is the severe economy of the genealogy. One generation receives life from another, stands for a time, and passes life forward. The line endures by moving through people who do not. What remains is descent. Who departs is the individual whose years have reached their sum. Seth's 807 years after Enoch's birth bring him to that sum. He has lived long enough to see the line extend far beyond the son he fathered at 105. The widening family confirms the fruitfulness granted at creation. His final total confirms the judgment imposed after rebellion. The two realities are held together without relief. God's blessing produces generations. Death removes their fathers. A family grows even as its oldest members disappear. Seth's death now establishes that Adam's ending was not unique to the first man. If only Adam had died, his death might appear to belong solely to the one who first transgressed. But Seth had been born outside the garden and had not occupied Adam's original place within it. He was the descendant, not the first actor in Eden. Still, he inherited the mortal human condition. The consequences crossed from father to son. That crossing is the decisive change in Seth's entry. Adam's death demonstrated the sentence. Seth's death establishes its transmission. The first man returns to dust, and then the son formed in his likeness follows him. The line does not end with Seth. Enoch is already present, along with Seth's other children and the generations that have grown around them. Life has moved ahead before death closes the father's account. But the advancing line now carries a refrain that will sound after each completed lifespan. It will become so familiar that the listener can anticipate it before the words arrive. A man fathers the next named son. He lives many more years. He has other sons and daughters. His total is counted. Then he dies. So it is with Seth. The child appointed after Abel lived 912 years, fathered Enoch, and saw his family multiply. He carried Adam's line through its first great loss and ensured that another named generation stood ready beyond him. Then Seth died. Enoch remained at the head of the selected line. He had already lived 807 years by the time Seth's life ended. He was no newcomer, stepping forward only after his father's death. For centuries he had occupied the middle place Seth once held, a son within an older generation, a father to the generation following him, and an ancestor within an expanding family. Long before Seth died, when Enoch was 90 years old, he fathered a son named Canaan. That birth moved the line one step farther from Adam. The first man had still been alive when Canaan entered the world. So were Seth and Enoch. Four named generations now stood together: Adam, his son Seth, Seth's son Enoch, and Enoch's son Canaan. The chronology creates an almost unimaginable continuity. Canaan was born only 325 years after the beginning of Adam's counted life. Adam would remain alive for another 605 years. Canaan could grow from infancy through centuries of adulthood, while the first man still belonged to the living family. The human past had not yet become remote. The generations were multiplying, but their beginnings remained near. Adam's creation, the loss of Eden, Abel's murder, Cain's exile, and Seth's appointment belonged to the history of people whose lifespans still overlapped. Canaan entered a family in which origin and continuation stood side by side. But proximity to Adam also meant proximity to Adam's mortality. Canaan was born into a household whose oldest ancestor was still alive, yet that ancestor's years were already moving toward their fixed total. A new child did not interrupt that movement. His birth added another living generation while the earlier ones continued toward death. Enoch named his son Canaan and then lived another 815 years. Those years formed nearly his entire lifespan after fatherhood began. The arrival of the named son was not the closing achievement of an old man. It came while the greater part of Enoch's life still lay ahead. Canaan would mature, and the household around them would continue to widen. Enoch fathered other sons and daughters. Once again, the genealogy acknowledges a much larger family than the narrow chain of selected names can display. Canaan is preserved because the line will pass through him, but he grew among brothers and sisters. Enoch's home became the source of several branches, each extending the human population beyond the few individuals named in the record. The multiplication fulfilled the blessing given at creation, but it also increased human responsibility. Every new life entered a world already shaped by the decisions of those before it. The children of Enoch received land that had to be worked, relationships that could be guarded or violated, and a family memory containing both worship and bloodshed. Their generation did not begin with a clean earth. No generation after Adam's disobedience would. Yet Enoch's time carried the practice that had begun with his birth. People called upon the name of the Lord. As his family grew, that invocation existed within an increasingly populated world. The descendants of Seth did not inherit only a sequence of fathers and sons. They inherited a way of directing themselves toward God. Canaan's birth therefore placed another generation within reach of that practice. He entered the branch in whose time human dependence had found an explicit voice. Before he could carry the line himself, he was the child of a man whose generation had become associated with calling upon the Lord. That inheritance was different from a trade passed from parent to child. A craft could teach someone how to manage a herd, play an instrument, or fashion an implement. Calling upon the Lord concerned the direction of a life. It acknowledged that human beings, however capable, remained dependent upon their Maker. Enoch's own name suited that recognition. It spoke of humanity and its frailty. Now, his long years allowed the apparent contradiction to unfold. A frail human being could live for more than 9 centuries. The contradiction is only apparent. Frailty does not mean that life must be brief. It means that life is dependent and limited, however long it lasts. Enoch could possess 905 years without possessing himself absolutely. His life had been received, and its duration would eventually be exhausted. The centuries after Canaan's birth were filled with the continuance of ordinary human life. Children were born, sons and daughters grew, households spread. Enoch moved from being Seth's young descendant to one of the oldest living members of the family. During those years, the position of each man changed, even when the genealogy's pattern did not. Canaan began as a child beneath 3 older named generations. With time, he became an adult, while Adam, Seth, and Enoch remained alive. Then Adam died. That death removed the first of the 4. Enoch was 695 years old when it happened. He had lived nearly 7 centuries with his grandfather Adam in the world. The loss gave Enoch direct experience of the refrain before it reached his father or himself. The first man's extraordinary span ended, and the family continued without him. Enoch still had his father Seth above him and his son Cain after him, but the oldest point in the living line had disappeared. Another 112 years passed before Seth died. By then, Enoch had reached 807. Cain had reached 717. The selected line did not have to wait for a young heir to mature after the patriarch's death. It already extended through centuries of established life. Seth's departure changed the order of the family, not its ability to continue. Enoch now became the oldest named survivor in the branch, descending from Seth. The responsibility contained in that position had traveled to him through two deaths. First Adam, then Seth, had completed their years. Enoch had received life from Seth, and Seth had received it from Adam. Now both men behind him were gone, while the descendants before him remained. The sequence made mortality personal without making it immediate. Enoch watched his grandfather die and continued for more than a century. He watched his father die and continued for almost another century. Death entered his experience through loss before it entered his genealogy as an ending. Those remaining years could easily create the illusion that Enoch had escaped the pattern. He was already more than 8 centuries old when Seth died. He continued to live while his father's total remained fixed at 912. Each year carried Enoch closer to his own total, but also demonstrated that his life had not yet reached it. Longevity gives death a strange position in this early genealogy. It is certain, but often distant. A man can become a father, see children mature, outlive ancient parents, and still have centuries remaining. The sentence over humanity does not always arrive quickly, but it never has to hurry. Enoch's life reached 900 years and continued. 5 more years remained. By then, the difference between his span and Seth's could be counted. Seth had lived 912 years. Adam had lived 930. Enoch would reach neither total. The sequence did not establish a simple rule in which every generation lost the same number of years. Each life had its own measure. What remained consistent was the boundary itself. Enoch's total came to 905 years. His lifespan had begun while Adam and Seth were both alive. It stretched through Cain's birth, the growth of other sons and daughters, Adam's death, Seth's death, and the transfer of seniority within the family. He had seen the selected line move from 3 named generations to 4, and the wider household multiply around them. His life also stood at the point where worship became part of the recorded human story. People began to call upon the Lord in his time. That was a genuine change in the history of Adam's descendants, an act directed toward the living God rather than toward the works of human hands. But calling upon the Lord did not function as a technique for avoiding mortality. Worship acknowledged dependence. It did not erase the sentence under which dependent humanity lived. The family oriented toward God was still Adam's family. Enoch therefore reached the same boundary as the men before him. His death carried the pattern into a third numbered life. Adam's death might have seemed uniquely tied to the first transgression. Seth's had shown the consequence passing from father to son. Enoch's now established the refrain across another generation. The line associated with calling upon the Lord was not exempt. That fact gives the genealogy its gathering tension. If the branch that turns toward God still ends in death, then what difference can fellowship with God finally make? At this stage, the record offers no escape. It simply holds worship and mortality together. People call upon the Lord, and people die. The two realities do not cancel each other. Mortality makes invocation urgent. Invocation places mortality before God. The family cannot preserve itself forever by producing descendants, yet it does not face its limit without a name to call. Enoch's death also places Canaan in the position his father had occupied after Seth. The son born when Enoch was 90 has now outlived him. For more than 8 centuries, Canaan's life overlapped with his father's. He did not receive the line as a fragile infant or an untested young man. He stood at the far side of a long shared history. The selected descent therefore remains intact. Death removes the father only after the named son is firmly present, surrounded by the larger family of sons and daughters. The person dies, the genealogy proceeds. That continuing structure supplies hope, but only a limited kind. The line survives Enoch, just as it survived Seth and Adam. Yet survival of the line has not become deliverance for the people within it. Each father gives life forward and then loses his own. Enoch's association with worship sharpens the unresolved pressure rather than relieving it. His generation had begun invoking the Lord. His years had been lived within that newly stated orientation. Still, the final words arrive unchanged. There is no violent attack here, no boast of retaliation, and no city raised against wandering. Enoch's account contains fatherhood, family growth, extraordinary duration, and the legacy of calling upon God. None of these needs to be diminished for death to remain decisive. The genealogy counts all 905 years, honors the continuance of his house, and then closes his life with the same unadorned verdict. Enoch died. Canaan had already lived 815 years when his father's account closed. The child born beneath 3 older generations now stood as the oldest named man in Seth's branch. His own part in carrying the line had begun much earlier. At 70 years of age, Canaan fathered Mahalalel. The birth came while the founding generations were still alive. Adam was 395 years old, Seth was 265, and Enoch was 160. The household now contained 5 named generations at once, from the first man to the newborn child. Mahalalel entered a family with an unusually long living memory. The descent from Adam was not yet a distant sequence reconstructed from names. Adam himself remained among the living. Seth, whose birth followed Abel's murder, was still present. Enoch, whose days were associated with calling upon the Lord, had not reached even a fifth of his eventual lifespan. Canaan now joined them as a father. At 70, he became the 4th man in the direct line to pass life forward, while the son in his care became its 5th visible link. The genealogy's pace can conceal how crowded these generations had become. Each named birth stood within a much larger family of sons and daughters, and those children produced households of their own. By Mahalalel's arrival, human life had been multiplying for centuries. The selected line remained narrow on the page, but it ran through an expanding population whose relationships reached outward in every direction. Within that larger world, Canaan's task was straightforward and consequential. The life received through Enoch had to continue through him. His father had given him a place in the branch that invoked the Lord. Now, Mahalalel received that inheritance from Canaan. The record advances through fatherhood rather than public power. Canaan is not introduced through a city, an invention, or a violent declaration. His decisive act within the genealogy is the begetting of the son through whom the line will proceed. What matters here is faithful transmission across time. After Mahalalel's birth, Canaan lived another 840 years. That span carried father and son through enormous changes in their places within the family. At first, Canaan remained a relatively young member of a household still headed by Adam. He stood below Enoch and Seth as well. Mahalalel began beneath all 4 men, the youngest named Life in a line whose roots were still living. Then the order began to change. When Mahalalel was 535 years old, Adam died. For more than 5 centuries, Mahalalel had shared the earth with the first man. Adam's death removed the family's beginning from among the living, but it did not leave the later generations without continuity. Seth, Enoch, Canaan, and Mahalalel remained. The descent had already been extended far enough that the loss of its first member could not erase it. Canaan was 605 when Adam died. He had spent those centuries not merely as Adam's descendant, but as one of the fathers continuing Adam's line. The human family had grown far beyond its first household, yet the sentence over its founder now unfolded before Canaan's own generation. Another 112 years passed. Seth then died at 912. Mahalalel was 647 when the son appointed after Abel completed his years. Canaan was 717. Once again, the oldest generation disappeared, while the later ones remained in place. The effect was cumulative. Adam's death could no longer be regarded as the isolated ending of the first man. Seth had followed him, and Canaan saw another link behind him removed. The line continued, but the distance between Canaan and the beginning was now measured not only by births, but by graves. Enoch became the oldest named survivor, with Canaan directly after him. For 98 more years, father and son lived under that arrangement. Then Enoch reached 905 years and died. Canaan was 815 at the time. Mahalalel was 745. That death placed Canaan at the head of the selected branch. The transfer was complete. Adam, Seth, and Enoch were gone. Canaan, once the 4th living name in the descent, now occupied the first place among those who remained. He did so with a mature successor already beside him. Mahalalel had lived for more than 7 centuries by the time Enoch died. Canaan's responsibility for continuity had long since been fulfilled at its most basic level. The named son was present, and the wider household had multiplied. Yet Canaan's own life continued for another 95 years. Those years created a distinct final interval. He had begun life beneath Adam, Seth, and Enoch. He ended it after outliving all 3. He had watched seniority move toward him, one death at a time, until no earlier named member of Seth's branch remained alive. Outliving one's ancestors did not mean outliving their condition. Canaan inherited their place, but he also approached their ending. The family order changed each time a father died. The rule governing the family did not. During the 840 years after Mahalalel's birth, Canaan also fathered other sons and daughters. His household spread beyond the one child whose name leads the genealogy forward. Brothers and sisters surrounded Mahalalel, and from them came additional branches within the multiplying human family. Canaan's long fatherhood thus worked on 2 levels. It enlarged the population through many children, and it preserved a particular descent through Mahalalel. The first fulfilled the broad blessing of fruitfulness. The second maintained the route the narrative had chosen to follow. That route had not yet displayed any open break with the pattern of death. Its distinction lay elsewhere. It came through Seth, the son Eve received as God's appointment, and through Enoch, whose time marked the beginning of calling upon the Lord. Canaan stood within that inheritance, but his entry adds no claim that descent itself can save. The numbers make the limitation unmistakable. Canaan became a father at 70. 840 years followed. His total reached 910. His life was 5 years longer than Enoch's and 2 years shorter than Seth's. The totals did not descend in a neat progression. Human life had not become a simple countdown in which each son necessarily lived less than his father. Canaan outlived Enoch, though he did not reach Seth's years or Adam's. What remained fixed was not the precise length, but the finality of the count. 910 is immense, but it is still a number that can be completed. Kenan's last 95 years after Enoch's death bring this truth into close focus. He had become the oldest named man in the line. No living father stood before him. The memories of Adam, Seth, and Enoch now belong to those who survived them. Kenan could carry those memories, but he could not preserve their bearers. He could lead the family, but he could not grant himself an unending place within it. Seniority was temporary because mortality was universal. Mahalalel watched that final interval from the position Kenan had once occupied. He was now the son, immediately behind the oldest father. He had already seen Adam, Seth, and Enoch die. With every loss, the boundary moved nearer to his own household. The long overlaps, therefore, did more than join generations. They allowed the consequence of death to be witnessed repeatedly. Mahalalel did not learn mortality from a single ancient event. Across his first 745 years, 3 patriarchs died. Then his own father approached the same end. Kenan's life continued until Mahalalel was 840. By then, the son born in Kenan's 70th year had spent 8.5 centuries beside him. Their shared time was longer than many entire eras in later history. Mahalalel had never lived without Kenan present. Now that arrangement reached its limit. The genealogy has no need to describe a struggle for succession. The line had already passed forward in the birth of the named son. No contest for control interrupts the descent. Mortality itself performs the transfer. Kenan's 910 years close, and Mahalalel remains. This makes Kenan the 4th named man in Seth's genealogy to complete his life. Adam had lived 930 years, Seth lived 912, Enoch lived 905, Kenan lived 910. Together their spans testify to extraordinary vitality in the earliest generations. Together their endings testify to something stronger than vitality. Every one of them received life. Everyone became part of a growing family. Everyone lived for centuries beyond the birth of the son through whom the line continued. None retained his life forever. The refrain now possesses the force of established expectation. It is no longer a surprise when a patriarch's total is followed by death. The listener has been trained by the genealogy itself. Birth opens the entry, years accumulate, children multiply, the total is reached, and the man disappears from the living line. That expectation will matter when one life refuses to close in the customary way. But no such interruption belongs to Kenan's account. His importance lies in carrying the family faithfully through another stage. Through him, the branch survives the deaths of Adam, Seth, and Enoch. Through him, Mahalalel enters the world while those earlier men still live. Through him, the selected descent passes intact into a generation farther removed from Eden. Yet Kenan cannot carry himself beyond his appointed years. His death also changes the living structure of the family more sharply than the births alone reveal. When Mahalalel was born, 4 named ancestors stood above him. By the time he reached 840, every one of them was gone. Adam had died first. Seth followed, then Enoch, now Kenan. Mahalalel had moved from the youngest named member of 5 living generations to the oldest named survivor of the direct line. The change came gradually across centuries, but its result was complete. The human beginning still governed his identity, yet its living representatives had receded one by one. He inherited the line, its accumulated memory, its worship, and its mortality. Kenan's other sons and daughters continued as well. The wider family did not cease with him. His death removed a father, not the descendants he had brought into being. Human multiplication once again proved able to withstand the loss of an individual, even an individual whose life had spanned 910 years. But endurance of the family remained different from endurance of the person. Kenan's name would be preserved because the genealogy required it, and his descendants would carry his life forward in another sense. Still, remembrance and descent did not keep him among the living. The pattern had survived another generation without weakening. Worship had not abolished it. Longevity had not exhausted it. A vast household had not absorbed it. The oldest man in the branch had no greater claim against death than the fathers he outlived. So Canaan's years reached their sum. The son of Enoch had fathered Mahalalel, lived another 840 years, and produced sons and daughters. He had known Adam, outlived Seth and Enoch, and stood for a time as the oldest name-bearer of the line. Then Canaan died, and Mahalalel stood where his father had stood before him. Mahalalel had become a father long before the deaths that eventually placed him at the head of the family. He was 65 years old when his son Jared was born. At that moment, all four of Mahalalel's named ancestors were still alive. Adam had reached 460 years, Seth was 330, Enoch 225, and Canaan 135. The direct line now extended through 6 living generations, from Adam to the newborn Jared. No earlier point in the genealogy had gathered so many named generations at once. Jared entered a household in which the man at its beginning was still present, followed by an unbroken succession of sons. Adam had fathered Seth. Seth had fathered Enoch. Enoch had fathered Canaan. Canaan had fathered Mahalalel, and now Mahalalel had fathered Jared. Each of those fathers had lived long enough to see the line advance well beyond his own son. Adam could look across 5 generations after himself. Seth lived among 4 generations descending from him. The family was multiplying outward through many unnamed children as well. But within that immense population, these 6 names marked the root Genesis was preserving. Jared's birth made that route longer without yet making its origin remote. Only 460 years separated him from the beginning of Adam's counted life. Adam still had 470 years remaining. Jared would therefore spend more than half of his first millennium in a world where the first man remained alive. Mahalalel's place had changed with the birth. He was still the youngest adult named in the line, beneath Canaan, Enoch, Seth, and Adam. Now he also stood above a son of his own. Life had passed through him into another generation before any of his ancestors had completed his years. That order gives the genealogy much of its stability. The future does not wait for the past to disappear. New generations are established while earlier ones remain. By the time death removes a father, the descent has often advanced through several sons beyond him. After Jared's birth, Mahalalel lived another 830 years. During those centuries, he fathered other sons and daughters. Jared belonged to a larger household, just as every selected son before him had. Brothers and sisters were born around the one name carried forward by the genealogy. Their presence widened Mahalalel's family, while Jared preserved the direct sequence. Mahalalel's fatherhood therefore began early within his total lifespan and continued across almost all of it. The 65 years before Jared's birth were followed by more than 8 centuries in which Mahalalel lived as a father, then as an ancestor to generations beyond his immediate children. His life unfolded inside a family still capable of extraordinary overlap. But the 6th generation gathering did not remain intact forever. When Jared reached 470 years, Adam died. The first man had lived long enough to share the world with this distant descendant for nearly 5 centuries. Jared's early life therefore belonged to the last period in which every named generation from Adam onward was simultaneously alive. Adam's death ended that unique assembly. The line itself did not break. Seth remained, followed by Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, and Jared. 5 named generations still stood together, each connected directly to the next. Mahalalel was 535 when Adam died. He had spent those years beneath the living presence of the family's first ancestor while raising Jared and fathering other children. Now one end of the chain disappeared, and Seth became its oldest living member. The family continued for another 112 years before death altered its order again. Seth died when Jared was 582 and Mahalalel was 647. For Mahalalel, this was the loss of the man from whom his branch had received its decisive beginning after Abel's death. Seth belonged to an earlier family crisis, but his life had stretched so far forward that Jared had known centuries under the same sky with him. His death carried that history out of the living household. Enoch then stood at the head of the line. Canaan followed him, then Mahalalel, then Jared. 98 years later, Enoch died. Jared was now 680, Mahalalel was 745. The man whose generation had been marked by calling upon the Lord was gone, but the line shaped by that practice continued through his descendants. Mahalalel had lived almost 3/4 of a millennium with Enoch. Jared had lived nearly 7 centuries with him. Their place in the worship-associated branch was therefore neither a late discovery nor a distant genealogical claim. It was the inherited setting of their lives. Canaan became the oldest named survivor. Mahalalel moved immediately behind his father, and Jared stood behind him. For 95 more years, those 3 generations remained together. During that interval, Mahalalel drew nearer to the position that every death behind him had been preparing him to occupy. He had begun as one among 6 named generations. Adam, Seth, and Enoch had now completed their years. Only Canaan remained before him. Then Canaan died at 910. Jared had reached 775. Mahalalel was 840. The death placed Mahalalel at the head of the selected line. 4 ancestors who had once stood above him were gone. Jared, born when all 4 were still alive, had watched every one of them disappear. Mahalalel's new seniority lasted 55 years. It was a relatively brief interval within a life measured in centuries, but it completed a profound reversal in his place within the household. At his birth, Adam, Seth, Enoch, and Canaan had all preceded him. At Jared's birth, those same 4 men were still present. Mahalalel had passed most of his life as one link inside a living chain reaching directly back to Adam. Now he stood at its oldest surviving point. He possessed no new kind of power because of it. The deaths of his ancestors gave him precedence within the family, but they also supplied the clearest possible account of what awaited him. He had seen 4 complete lifespans close. Their totals differed, yet their final words had been the same. The last 55 years of Mahalalel's life unfolded with Jared already ancient. Jared was not waiting in vulnerable youth for the line to pass to him. At 775, he had already lived longer than many later biblical eras would last. By the time his father died, he would be 830. The succession was secure in the practical sense. Mahalalel had fathered the named son, raised a larger family, and lived to see later generations emerge. Death could remove him without erasing the descent, but that security applied to the line, not to Mahalalel himself. His years now approached their sum, 65 before Jared's birth and 830 after it, for a total of 895. This made Mahalalel's lifespan the shortest yet completed in Seth's genealogy. Adam had lived 930 years, Seth 912, Enoch 905, and Canaan 910. Mahalalel did not reach 900. The difference is modest beside such enormous spans, but within the genealogy it is visible. Human longevity remains great, yet no fixed number belongs to every generation. Mahalalel's life ends earlier than those of all 4 named ancestors before him. Still, 895 years provided more than enough time for every living relationship around him to change. He began beneath 4 generations. He became Jared's father while they were all alive. He saw Adam die, then Seth, then Enoch, then his own father, Canaan. Finally, he stood as the oldest remaining man in the selected descent. The sequence placed Jared beside him through each loss. Jared was 470 when Adam died, 582 at Seth's death, 680 at Enoch's, and 775 at Canaan's. He did not merely receive a genealogy made of names. His lifespan crossed the endings that transformed those names into ancestors. By the time Mahalalel's own death approached, Jared had watched the established pattern unfold 4 times. The oldest man's place moved from Adam to Seth, from Seth to Enoch, from Enoch to Canaan, and from Canaan to Mahalalel. Each transfer had been made by death. Now it would move again. Mahalalel's other sons and daughters remained part of the family he had formed. Their lives testified to the same continuing fruitfulness seen in every generation. His household would outlast him in many branches, while Genesis followed the one leading through Jared. No city, craft, conflict, or recorded speech defines Mahalalel's entry. Its action lies in the passage of life and responsibility through time. He receives the line from Canaan, gives it to Jared, expands his family, survives all 4 men who once stood above him, and reaches the end after ensuring that those behind him are established. That movement may appear quiet, but it is the essential work of the genealogy. The promised Enoch can enter the human story only because each preceding generation carries the descent forward. If any selected link were absent, the route to him would be broken. Mahalalel is one of those necessary links. His importance does not depend upon a dramatic public event. He stands between Canaan and Jared, joining the worship-associated descendants of Seth to the generation immediately approaching the man whose ending will overturn the genealogy's rhythm. Yet Mahalalel himself does not overturn it. His 895 years come to their boundary. The son he fathered at 65 has now lived beside him for 830 years. Jared remains ready to carry the selected line, surrounded by the wider family Mahalalel produced. Everything required for continuity is present. Nothing interrupts mortality. Mahalalel dies. His death leaves Jared as the oldest named bearer of the branch. The newborn who once stood at the end of 6 living generations has outlasted the 5 men before him. Adam, Seth, Enoch, Canaan, and now Mahalalel have all disappeared from the living sequence. Jared remains, carrying their descent into the next generation. Jared had not waited for seniority before extending the line. That decisive event lay far back in his life, while every named ancestor before him was still alive. Jared was 162 years old when he fathered a son and named him Enoch. The name had appeared once before in Adam's family, but this child belonged to an entirely different descent. The earlier Enoch had been born to Cain and had given his name to Cain's city. This Enoch was the son of Jared, the grandson of Mahalalel, and a descendant of Seth. His identity rests within that unbroken sequence. The 2 lines had separated close to the beginning of the human family. Cain's branch ran through the Enoch associated with the settlement, then onward to Lamech and the household known for herding, music, and metalwork. Seth's branch ran through Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, and Jared. The repeated name creates no meeting between them. Jared's son stands firmly within the line whose earliest distinguishing practice was calling upon the Lord. At Enoch's birth, Adam was 622 years old. Seth was 492. Enoch was 387. Canaan was 297. Mahalalel was 227. Jared was 162. The newborn child became the 7th named generation when counted inclusively from Adam. Adam first, Seth second, Enoch third, Kenan fourth, Mahalalel fifth, Jared sixth, and Enoch seventh. That position is exact. It identifies the man who will later be remembered as the seventh from Adam, and prevents his life from being absorbed into the wrong family. He did not arise from Cain's city or from Lamech's violent house. He entered through Seth's appointed branch, 6 generations after the first man. All 6 men before him were still alive. For the second time in this genealogy, the direct descent gathered 7 named generations within the same world. Enoch did not enter an empty ancestral landscape, surrounded only by stories of men long dead. Adam himself remained alive, followed by every father connecting Adam to this child. The line was visible in living persons: Adam, then Seth, Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, and Enoch. This gathering gave Enoch a place both near the beginning and far along the descent. He was separated from Adam by 6 father-to-son transitions, yet he was born while Adam still had more than 3 centuries left to live. The family had advanced through generations faster than death had removed them. The result was an extraordinary concentration of human continuity. Enoch's father could be traced to Adam without crossing a single death at the moment of Enoch's birth. Jared had received life from Mahalalel, Mahalalel from Kenan, Kenan from Enoch, Enoch from Seth, and Seth from Adam. Every man in that sequence was present among the living. No one in the line had yet been reduced, for Enoch, to a genealogical name alone. The descent reached backward through a living chain. At the same time, the child entered a family already overshadowed by the ending assigned to humanity. Adam had not yet died, but the sentence over him remained. Enoch's birth did not occur before mortality entered the world. It occurred during the long interval before mortality completed its work upon the first man. That difference is crucial. The crowded genealogy can look untouched by death because so many patriarchs remain alive together. Their years are enormous, their households continue to expand, and another generation arrives before the oldest one departs. But their longevity is not immortality. The count attached to each man is still moving. Enoch became the youngest member of a living sequence whose ending had been announced, even though its refrain had not yet begun to sound in the numbered genealogy. He was born among men who would all, except for the mystery surrounding his own eventual departure, be recorded as dying. The tension surrounding his life therefore existed from the beginning of his placement. He was 7th in a line proceeding through mortal fathers. Nothing in the fact of his birth separated him from their humanity. He came through ordinary generation as Jared's son. He belonged to the same family, inhabited the same world beyond Eden, and stood under the same history. Yet Genesis has chosen to preserve his name as the next essential link. Jared's age at the birth also sets Enoch apart from the sons immediately before him in the genealogy. Seth fathered Enoch at 105. Enoch fathered Kenan at 90. Kenan fathered Mahalalel at 70. Mahalalel fathered Jared at 65. Jared was 162 when Enoch arrived. The pattern had shifted. More than a century and a half of Jared's life passed before the birth of the son, through whom the selected line would continue. Even so, Adam and all the intervening fathers still remained alive because their own spans overlapped so widely. Jared's 162 years had already placed him within a densely layered household. He had been born as the 6th named generation. He grew while Adam stood at the beginning of the family, and Mahalalel stood immediately above him as father. When Enoch was born, Jared moved into the central human role the genealogy repeatedly records. The son became a father and gave the line forward. The act appears ordinary because fatherhood has structured every entry before it. That ordinariness is part of Enoch's story. The man whose ending will be unlike the endings around him does not enter through a spectacular birth. No royal announcement, miraculous sign, or public confrontation accompanies his arrival. He is named within the same measured succession as the others. Jared fathered Enoch. That is the beginning Scripture gives him. The extraordinary feature of his life will come through the relationship he lives, not through a different kind of human origin. His placement as seventh also gives the genealogy a point of arrival. The preceding names have done more than fill a chronological gap between Adam and a later figure. Together, they establish the line in which Enoch must be understood. Adam supplies the beginning in divine creation and human fall. Seth carries the family beyond Abel's murder. Enoch stands where calling upon the Lord becomes an identifiable practice. Canaan and Mahalalel preserve that descent through successive generations. Jared brings it to Enoch. Each name fixes the identity of the next. By the time the seventh is reached, there can be no ambiguity about which Enoch the record intends. The distinction is more than a matter of organizing two men with the same name. Their fathers place them within different moral and narrative histories. Cain's Enoch enters after his father leaves the Lord's presence and settles in Nod. Jared's Enoch enters through a branch whose record has directed attention toward invocation of the Lord and the transmission of life from Adam through Seth. The city named Enoch represented an attempt at settled continuity in the land of wandering. This Enoch's importance will not be tied to a city or monument. His place is secured through genealogy first, then through the manner in which he relates to God. For now, only the first of those has been established. He is Jared's son, the seventh generation from Adam through Seth. At his birth, the years of the older men continued. Adam's life advanced beyond 622. Seth moved beyond 492. Enoch passed 387, Kenan 297, Mahalalel 227, and Jared 162. The child's days began while theirs accumulated around him. The enormous overlaps meant that Enoch's earliest world contained both the old and the new at once. The first man had not yet left the living family, and the seventh had already arrived. Human generations were spreading across the earth without losing direct connection to their origin. But the gathering would not last. Adam had 308 years remaining when Enoch was born. The number was vast, yet it was now smaller than the portion Adam had already lived. The first man's life had crossed its midpoint long before Enoch arrived and was moving toward its closing total. Seth had 420 years left. Enoch had 518. Kenan had 613. Mahalalel had 668. Their order of death would not follow their positions with perfect simplicity because the lengths of their lives differed. Still, all would eventually reach the same ending that had governed the family since Eden. Jared himself had 800 years remaining after Enoch's birth. His total lifespan would ultimately surpass that of every named ancestor before him, but at the moment his son entered the line, Jared's vast remaining years were future, not possession. The genealogy measures a life only when its full count is complete. The arrival of Enoch therefore creates a new kind of pressure within the familiar succession. The list has reached the person promised by the title, but nothing visible has yet broken the rhythm. A father has begotten a son. The son has received a name. The years of the household continue. If the account proceeded exactly as before, Enoch would become another link defined by fatherhood, longevity, other children, a final total, and death. Every element needed for that ordinary entry is in place. He belongs to mortal humanity. His ancestors are mortal. His father is mortal. The world around him offers no natural escape from the sentence already operating through Adam's house. The significance of being seventh does not lie in the number acting as a charm or guarantee. It lies in the precision with which the genealogy identifies him. This is the Enoch later canonical writers can locate without confusion. The man descending from Adam through Seth, Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, and Jared. His place in the generations will remain stable even when his departure overturns expectation. The unusual ending does not detach him from human history. It becomes meaningful because he is so firmly embedded within it. He is one of Adam's descendants before he becomes the exception within Adam's genealogy. That descent also carries responsibility forward. Cain had once denied responsibility for his brother. Lamech had glorified his own retaliation. Seth's line had answered the damaged world by calling upon the Lord. Enoch inherited a human history containing all three movements: violence, pride, and worship. He did not enter an innocent world. By the seventh generation, human beings had built settlements, formed specialized ways of life, developed instruments and metalwork, and learned to sing of vengeance. The skills and failures of the early family were already part of the earth he inhabited. The record does not need to assign those actions directly to Enoch's immediate household for them to define the broader human setting. Both Cain's descendants and Seth's descendants came from Adam. The branches were distinct, but the world was shared. Within that shared world, the son of Jared took his place. The first Enoch's name had been fixed to a location. Jared's Enoch was fixed to a sequence, seventh from Adam. That sequence now stood complete before him, 6 fathers leading back to humanity's first man. Behind Adam lay creation by God. Before Enoch lay an earthly life whose defining movement had not yet begun. For the moment, he was simply the newest child in an ancient living line, born while every named ancestor still walked the earth. Jared had fathered Enoch. The genealogy had reached the man it had been approaching. For 65 years, Enoch remained the youngest named member of that line. His father Jared continued to live. So did Mahalalel, Canaan, Enoch, Seth, and Adam. Enoch's first decades unfolded beneath 6 generations of living ancestors, an arrangement that joined him directly to the entire recorded descent. When Enoch was born, Adam had already lived 622 years. By Enoch's 65th year, Adam had reached 687. The first man still had centuries ahead of him. Seth reached 557 during those same years. Enoch reached 452, Canaan 362, Mahalalel 292, and Jared 227. None had yet approached the final year assigned to him. No death had broken the living sequence between Enoch and Adam. The genealogy now paused, in effect, at its widest span. 7 named generations stood together, and time advanced across all of them at once. Enoch's earliest place in this household was that of a descendant surrounded by fathers. Jared stood immediately above him. Beyond Jared stood Mahalalel, then Canaan, Enoch, Seth, and Adam. Each man represented a completed act of transmission. One generation had received life and passed it forward before the previous generation disappeared. That continuity gave Enoch a firm place in human history. He belonged to no isolated legend and appeared from no unknown corner of the ancient world. His ancestry was named one father at a time. The account located him within Adam's family before attaching anything extraordinary to him. For these first 65 years, Genesis records no break in the ordinary pattern. Enoch lived as the other patriarchs had lived before the birth of their selected sons. His years accumulated, but the distinctive summary of his life had not yet begun. 65 was early within the scale of the antediluvian genealogy. Mahalalel had become a father at that age, the youngest such point among the named ancestors before Enoch. Canaan had been 70, Enoch 90, Seth 105, and Jared 162. By comparison with the total lives surrounding him, 65 years formed only an opening span. Yet the number becomes the hinge of Enoch's entire entry. When he was 65 years old, Enoch fathered a son named Methuselah. The birth extended Seth's branch into an eighth-named generation from Adam. The living line now ran from the first man through Seth, Enoch, Cain, Mahalalel, Jared, and Enoch to the newborn child. Adam was still alive. At 687, he stood 7 father-to-son transitions above Methuselah. The first counted human life, and the eighth-named generation occupied the earth at the same time. The family had multiplied forward with extraordinary speed when measured against the immense spans of its earliest members. The chronology makes Methuselah's arrival one of the most densely connected births in Genesis. He entered while every named ancestor in his direct line remained living. No one between him and Adam had yet died. His identity could be traced backward, not only through preserved names, but through an unbroken company of men, still within their earthly years. Adam was 687. Seth was 557. Enoch was 452. Cain was 362. Mahalalel was 292. Jared was 227. Enoch was 65. Then came Methuselah. 8 generations now stood together. The birth also changed Enoch's position. He was no longer only Jared's son and the youngest named descendant of the line. He had become a father. The life he received had passed through him to another person, and the genealogy's future now extended beyond him. That movement was familiar. Every selected patriarch before Enoch had been identified through the birth of the next named son. Adam fathered Seth, Seth fathered Enoch, Enoch fathered Cain, Cain fathered Mahalalel, Mahalalel fathered Jared, Jared fathered Enoch, now Enoch fathered Methuselah. In that respect, nothing distinguished him from his ancestors. He entered fatherhood by the same ordinary human means, within the same pattern of succession. Methuselah's birth placed Enoch more deeply inside the genealogy, not outside it. This matters because Enoch's later distinction could otherwise make him appear detached from the responsibilities of ordinary life. Genesis presents the opposite. Before it characterizes his relationship with God, it establishes him as a son and a father within a continuing household. His story is rooted in family succession. He receives life from Jared. He gives life to Methuselah. He occupies a place between generations, bearing responsibility in both directions. Methuselah's name now became the next essential link in the descent. Through him, Enoch's line would continue toward Lamech and Noah. But at the moment of his birth, those later generations had not yet arrived. The family's attention rested upon a new child, born into a world still dominated by the presence of ancient fathers. Humanity's beginning had not vanished into inaccessible time. Adam remained alive as Methuselah's life began. Seth, whose birth followed the first murder, also remained. Enoch, associated with the beginning of invocation of the Lord, still had more than 4 centuries left. Cain, Mahalalel, and Jared stood between those older men and Enoch's household. Methuselah therefore entered a line rich in continuity, but burdened by the same unresolved condition. 8 living generations did not amount to immortality. Their coexistence demonstrated the strength of human multiplication. But every older man's years were moving toward a total already fixed within the genealogy. The family could appear almost permanent because no named patriarch had yet died. A child could be born with 7 direct ancestors still living, each attached to a lifespan measured in centuries. From within such a household, mortality might seem unimaginably remote. But Adam's continued presence carried its own warning. He was the man over whom the sentence had first been spoken. His survival to 687 did not cancel that sentence. It showed only how long death could wait before completing its work. Enoch became a father under that tension. Behind him stood a living succession reaching to the first man. Before him lay Methuselah, the newest bearer of human life. The line looked backward toward creation and forward through another child, while the loss of Eden governed the world in which both directions met. At 65, Enoch had lived less than a tenth of Adam's current age. He had not yet reached the point at which any ancestor in the selected line had died. His knowledge of the family's mortality was inherited from the judgment over humanity and from the earlier deaths outside this genealogy, not yet from the closing refrain that would soon dominate its numbered entries. The timing gives Enoch's story a particular shape. His defining relationship begins before the funeral rhythm of the genealogy begins. He does not wait until Adam dies to orient his life toward God. The decisive marker is attached to Methuselah's birth. While all 7 ancestors remain present, Genesis states Enoch's first 65 years with complete simplicity. He lived, and then he fathered Methuselah. The same form has introduced every patriarch's adult place in the line. But when the account turns from Methuselah's birth to the years that follow, its language changes. That change does not erase what came before it. Enoch's first 65 years still belong to his total life. They place him within the same measured humanity as Adam's other descendants. They establish the age at which he becomes a father and the generation through which his family continues. The distinction lies in what this birth marks. For the earlier patriarchs, the birth of the named son was followed by a statement that the father lived a certain number of additional years. The genealogy then mentioned other sons and daughters, counted the total, and recorded the father's death. The structure was consistent enough to create expectation. Enoch's entry has reached that same transition point. Methuselah has been born. The remaining years are ready to be counted, yet Genesis will not describe them as years merely added to a lifespan. From this moment onward, Enoch's life receives a relational direction. The account that has measured every man by descent and duration is about to characterize one man by the way he lives before God. The timing does not make Methuselah the cause of a change. Scripture attributes elsewhere, nor does it supply an unrecorded crisis or private revelation. It gives the chronology. Enoch is 65 when Methuselah is born, and the distinctive description follows that birth. The event itself is enough to alter Enoch's responsibilities. A son now depends upon him. The man who had stood beneath 6 living fathers now has a child beneath him. He belongs simultaneously to the inheritance behind him and the future ahead. His father Jared is still young by the standards of this age, with centuries remaining. Enoch does not assume the headship of the family, inherit it through loss, or stand alone as the last bearer of the line. His father, grandfather, and every earlier named ancestor remain alive. His spiritual distinction will emerge without any visible change in his genealogical rank. This separates his coming movement from the succession of seniority that governed the earlier entries. Enoch's importance does not begin when older men disappear and leave him their place. It begins while he remains surrounded by them. Nor does Methuselah's birth remove Enoch from ordinary human obligation. Fatherhood ties him more closely to the world. A new generation has entered through him, and his life must now be lived amid the demands of a growing household. The man later remembered for being taken by God first becomes the father of the man whose lifespan will be the longest recorded in Scripture. One life will be strikingly brief beside the surrounding patriarchs. The other will reach 969 years. At this moment, however, neither completed span is visible. There is only a 65-year-old father and his newborn son within an ancient family. The contrast begins quietly. Adam, already 687, is still living. Jared, at 227, has watched his selected son become a father. Mahalalel, Kenan, Enoch, and Seth remain part of the same line. Methuselah opens his eyes upon a world containing every generation required to connect him to humanity's beginning. Enoch stands between them all, seventh from Adam, son of Jared, father of Methuselah. His first 65 years have carried him to the same threshold reached by every patriarch before him. The named son is born. The line is secure for another generation. The account is ready to measure what remains. What remains will define him. Genesis marks the next 300 years with a phrase it has used for no earlier patriarch. Enoch walked with God. The change is immediate. Until now, the genealogy has told us that a man lived. Enoch's years after Methuselah's birth are described as a walk. In biblical language, a person's walk is the sustained course of a life. It is direction expressed through conduct, not one isolated encounter or a single moment of religious intensity. Enoch's distinction lies in continuing with God across the years allotted to him. The account places that walk within time, 300 years. A relationship sustained for 3 centuries cannot be reduced to an impressive episode. Days become seasons, children mature, households expand, and generations change places around him. Through all of it, the same description governs Enoch's life. He walks with God. The wording is also personal. Enoch does not merely live under God's distant rule or retain the worshipping custom of his ancestors. He walks with God. The man's course and the divine presence are joined in the concise language Genesis chooses to remember him. This is fellowship expressed as a way of life. It implies agreement with God's direction, attentiveness to God, and a life ordered in relation to him. The text does not present Enoch as approaching God only when danger becomes immediate. His walk continues across ordinary years before and after the great changes within his family. Those ordinary years matter because Enoch does not leave human responsibilities behind. After Methuselah's birth, he fathers other sons and daughters. The genealogy places family life inside his walk with God. Enoch remains a husband and father within a growing household. Children are born after Methuselah, and those children become part of the expanding generations of Adam. His distinction is therefore not withdrawal from human life. Enoch's relationship with God unfolds amid the same fundamental work of succession seen throughout the genealogy. He raises a family, carries responsibility for children, and watches new lives enter a world already marked by toil and mortality. Genesis holds both aspects together in a single sentence. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years, and he fathered sons and daughters. The grammar refuses to separate devotion from duration or family. His walk is not an interval between more practical concerns. It is the character of the years in which those concerns continue. Methuselah grows during this period. He begins as the 8th named generation beneath 7 living ancestors. As Enoch's walk advances, the child moves toward adulthood while the ancient men above them continue accumulating years. When Enoch has walked with God for 1 year after Methuselah's birth, Adam is 688, Jared is 228, Methuselah is 1. The direct line still stretches through 8 living generations. 10 years pass. Enoch is 75, Methuselah 10, and Adam 697. The family remains intact. 50 years pass. Enoch is 115, Methuselah 50, and Adam 737. No named patriarch in the selected line has yet died. The first man remains alive, while the 7th from Adam continues his walk with God. and the eighth generation matures beneath him. A century passes after Methuselah's birth. Enoch is 165. Adam has reached 787. Seth is 657. Enoch is 552. Cain is 462. Mahalalel is 392. Jared is 327. Methuselah is 100. Enoch's walk has now lasted longer than his first 65 years, yet its defining direction has not changed. The child born at its chronological beginning is no longer a child. Enoch's other sons and daughters have enlarged the household. The relationship named by Genesis persists across every transition. The surrounding generations make the duration even more striking. Enoch does not walk with God because he stands alone after losing everyone before him. For most of these years, he remains one of many living descendants beneath Adam. Jared is still his father. Mahalalel, Cain, Enoch, and Seth remain above Jared. Enoch lives within a densely connected family, not at its lonely edge. His walk is nevertheless his own. A godly inheritance can establish a setting, but a person must live his own course within it. The invocation that began in Enoch's time has now become, in one descendant, a complete orientation of life. What was described as people calling upon the Lord is described in Enoch as one man walking with God. The movement is from appeal to sustained companionship. Calling upon God directs the human voice toward him. Walking with God directs the whole course of life alongside him. The earlier practice and Enoch's life belong to the same Godward branch, but the new phrase gives this seventh generation a distinction no ancestor has received. That distinction does not depend on public rank. Adam remains the first man. Seth carries the significance of the son appointed after Abel. Enoch is associated with the beginning of invocation. Jared remains the father above Enoch. Nothing in the family's order makes Enoch its ruling patriarch. Yet Genesis identifies him by the relationship that will outweigh every measure of status or duration around him. Another century advances. Enoch reaches 265. Methuselah reaches 200. Adam is 887, moving into the final portion of his life. Seth has reached 757, Enoch 652, Cain 562, Mahalalel 492, and Jared 427. Enoch has now walked with God for 200 years. The statement remains active through change. It does not say that Enoch once walked with God during an earlier season. His life continues under the same description, while Adam grows old and Methuselah grows toward fatherhood. Enoch's sons and daughters also create new relationships around him. The genealogies formula indicates a household larger than the selected line. Methuselah will carry the named descent forward, but the other children belong fully to Enoch's years. Their births, growth, and place within the family occur during the walk Genesis records. The account gives no conflict between those roles. Enoch's fellowship with God does not compete with his fatherhood. It governs the life in which fatherhood occurs. His children know him within the 3 centuries, summarized by that relationship. This makes Enoch's walk visible in its most basic biblical sense. It is lived, not displayed. Genesis preserves no monument bearing his name and associates him with no specialized craft. The record gives him something more intimate and comprehensive. His memorial is the direction of his life. Time continues. When Enoch is 300 years old, he has walked with God for 235 years. Methuselah is 235, Adam is 922. The family has now reached the edge of its first great death in the numbered line. Adam, who was already 622 when Enoch was born, has only 8 years remaining in his total. Enoch has never lived in a world without Adam. For 300 years, the seventh generation has shared the earth with the first. The judgment pronounced over humanity has always belonged to their world, but the patriarchal chain behind Enoch is still unbroken by death. Then Enoch reaches his 308th year. Methuselah is 243, Jared is 470, Mahalalel is 535, Canaan is 605, Enoch is 695, Seth is 800, Adam reaches 930, and Adam dies. The death changes the living structure around Enoch for the first time. The line that had stretched through 7 ancestors behind Methuselah now loses its beginning. Adam's counted years close, and Seth becomes the oldest surviving man in the selected branch. Enoch has been walking with God for 243 years when it happens. The event gives mortality a new immediacy within his own lifetime. The first man's long survival had linked every generation to humanity's origin. Now that living link is removed, the sentence announced outside Eden has reached its first complete expression in the numbered genealogy. Enoch continues walking with God. Adam's death does not begin the walk, and it does not end it. The relationship was established across more than 2 centuries before the loss and remains the defining movement afterward. That continuity matters. Grief, succession, and the altered order of the family become part of Enoch's remaining years, but none replaces the direction already governing them. He walks with God in a world where Adam lives, and he walks with God after Adam dies. Seth now stands at the head of the living descent. Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, and Enoch follow. Methuselah remains the youngest named member until the next selected generation appears. The household has lost one patriarch, but its generations continue. Another year passes after Adam's death, then another. Enoch's walk extends beyond the first funeral of an aged ancestor. The refrain that will eventually dominate the genealogy has sounded once, but it has not yet reached Seth, Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, or Jared. All 5 remain alive throughout Enoch's remaining years. This creates an unusual position for him. Enoch has seen mortality claim Adam, yet he will not live long enough to witness the recorded deaths of the other patriarchs above him. Seth has more than a century remaining. Jared has centuries still ahead. Enoch's life is moving according to a different measure. For now, the years continue without disclosing that ending. Enoch's family continues as well. Sons and daughters live within the household. Methuselah advances through his 3rd century. Jared remains Enoch's living father, watching his son's years approach a total far below his own eventual span. Enoch does not become the oldest man in the branch. He does not inherit Adam's place, Seth's place, or Jared's place. The normal order of generational succession will never bring him to the head of this family. His significance has already been established by another kind of precedence. Among all the named lives counted so far, his is the first summarized as a walk with God. That phrase now bears the weight of nearly 300 years. It has survived the changing ages of his children. It has outlasted Adam's final centuries. It has continued through the first patriarchal death and the transfer of seniority to Seth. It has accompanied Enoch as son, father, descendant, and ancestor. The account does not multiply descriptions because none is needed. One image holds the entire movement. Enoch walks with God. A walk proceeds step by step. No single step constitutes the whole, yet every step belongs to its direction. Genesis uses that ordinary human action to describe an extraordinary consistency. Enoch's life moves forward in companionship with the God who gave life to Adam and before whom every human year is counted. The final portion of the 300 years passes. Seth remains alive. So do Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, and Jared. Methuselah reaches the end of his 3rd century. Enoch's other sons and daughters remain the evidence of a full family life lived across these decades. At last, the period named by Genesis is complete. 300 years have passed since Methuselah's birth. 300 years of fatherhood, family growth, generational change, and sustained fellowship with God now stand behind Enoch. The genealogy has reached the end of his walk's measured duration. The total number of Enoch's years was 365. 65 years came before Methuselah's birth. 300 followed it. Genesis joins them into one complete earthly span, counted with the same precision used for every patriarch around him. Yet the number is startling. Adam lived 930 years. Seth would live 912. Enoch, 905. Canaan, 910. Mahalalel, 895. Jared, Enoch's own father, would live 962. Even before all those totals have been reached within the unfolding chronology, Enoch's 365 years stand far below the scale established by his family. He does not reach half of Adam's lifespan. He lives less than half as long as Seth, Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, or Jared. Compared with his father's eventual total, Enoch's years amount to little more than a third. By antediluvian measure, his life is strikingly brief. That brevity does not mean his life lacked time or substance. 365 years contain generations of ordinary human experience. Enoch became a father, then fathered other sons and daughters. He watched Methuselah grow from infancy into his 3rd century. His household expanded while his walk with God continued. But the genealogy has trained the listener to expect far more time after the birth of a named son. Adam lived 800 years after Seth's birth. Seth lived 807 after Enoch. Enoch lived 815 after Canaan. Canaan lived 840 after Mahalalel. Mahalalel lived 830 after Jared. Jared would live 800 years after Enoch. Enoch lives 300 years after Methuselah. The difference is not slight. His post-fatherhood span is shorter by 5 centuries than those immediately surrounding it. The pattern of extraordinary longevity continues above him and will continue below him, but Enoch's count closes early within that vast scale. When his 365th year arrives, Jared is only 527. The father is still centuries from the end of his own life. Enoch reaches the full total assigned to him, while Jared remains in what the genealogy treats as the middle portion of his years. The expected order of succession has not occurred. The son's earthly count is complete before the father's. Mahalalel is 592. Canaan is 662. Enoch is 752. Seth is 857. Every named ancestor between Enoch and Adam remains alive except Adam himself. Seth has 55 years remaining. Enoch has 153. Canaan has 248. Mahalalel has 303. Jared has 435. Enoch's count reaches its boundary while 5 older generations continue. That position is unlike anything the genealogy has yet recorded. Adam died first because he stood at the beginning and had already lived 622 years when Enoch was born. His death followed the natural order of the line. Enoch's total now places him at the edge of departure, while men born centuries before him remain alive. He has not become the oldest patriarch. He has not received the senior place once held by Adam and now held by Seth. He remains Jared's son to the end of his numbered years. Methuselah, meanwhile, is 300. His father's total is complete, while Methuselah has lived less than a third of the lifespan that will eventually be assigned to him. The son continues into centuries his father will never share. The contrast between them is the greatest in the genealogy. Enoch's 365 years will be followed in the selected line by a life of 969 years. The man with the shortest earthly span, in Genesis 5, fathers the man with the longest. That contrast prevents length of life from serving as the measure of divine favor or human significance. If years alone determined the weight of a life, Enoch would be diminished beside nearly everyone around him. Genesis does the opposite. It gives the shortest completed span the most distinguished description. The others lived. Enoch walked with God. The difference has now been sustained across his full account. His 65 years before Methuselah established his place within ordinary descent. His 300 years afterward established the character of his mature life. The total holds both together without exaggerating either. He is not remembered because he accumulated the greatest number. His father will exceed him by 597 years. His son will exceed him by 604. Yet neither greater number makes Enoch's account less complete. The genealogy counts duration, but it evaluates direction. Enoch's direction was toward God. For 3 centuries, that direction remained steady, while his place within the family changed. He began the period as a new father beneath 6 living ancestors. He ended it as the father of a 300-year-old son, with Adam gone and 5 older patriarchs still present. The household around him aged. Children were born. Adam reached his final year. Seth became the oldest living member of the branch. Methuselah moved toward his own place within the descent. Through every change, Enoch's walk remained the controlling statement of his life. Now, the walking years have been counted. The image approaches an ending the genealogy has made painfully predictable. Every earlier completed entry has moved from birth to fatherhood, from fatherhood to later children, from later children to a total, and from the total to death. Adam's years totaled 930, and he died. Seth's years totaled 912, and he died. Enosh's years totaled 905, and he died. Canaan's years totaled 910, and he died. Mahalalel's years totaled 895, and he died. Enoch's entry has reached precisely the point at which those words should return. Its parts have been arranged in the familiar order. Jared fathered him. Enoch lived 65 years and fathered Methuselah. He continued 300 years and fathered sons and daughters. His total came to 365. Nothing required by the genealogical pattern remains except the closing verdict. That expectation has grown stronger with every death before him. The refrain is no longer merely information about individuals. It is the sound of Adam's sentence moving through Adam's descendants. However long a patriarch lives, the total is followed by the same result. Enoch belongs fully to that humanity. He was born through an earthly father, formed a family, and lived within the generations outside Eden. His walk with God did not make his body unrelated to Adam's dust. His 365 years were human years, numbered just as theirs were. The record has therefore brought him to the most severe test of its defining phrase. What does it finally mean for a mortal man to walk with God? If Enoch's account closes like all the others, his walk still distinguishes the manner of his life. It would remain a worthy testimony within a genealogy of mortality. A man may walk with God and still reach death, as later faithful people certainly will. But the unusual wording has created another possibility within the narrative itself. Genesis has not said that Enoch merely called upon God, feared God, or performed one obedient act. It has described his whole 300-year course as movement with God. Now that course reaches its earthly boundary. The brevity of 365 years sharpens the moment. Enoch's life does not slowly approach the upper range established by Adam's family. It stops while every expectation of the age suggests that centuries should remain. Jared is still alive. Seth is still alive. Enosh, Canaan, and Mahalalel are still alive. Methuselah's immense future stretches ahead. If Enoch were to die at this point, he would be the first named patriarch in Seth's line to complete his life out of generational order. The son would precede the father. The younger man would leave, while 5 older ancestors continued. That would be unusual, but it would not break the dominion of the refrain. Death can take the younger before the older without ceasing to be death. The deeper disruption lies in the sentence Genesis is about to use. The genealogy's careful repetition has prepared the ear to recognize even the smallest alteration. Its formulas are not empty. Their sameness establishes the human condition so that a changed formula can be heard with full force. For every completed life so far, the final subject has been the man himself. He died. The verdict names what happened to him under the inherited sentence. Enoch's account is poised to shift the subject of the action. His life has already been presented through relationship rather than duration alone. The coming closure will preserve that emphasis. The God with whom Enoch walked will not disappear from the account when Enoch's years are complete. That is why the 300 years matter. The ending does not arrive as an isolated marvel attached to a stranger. It arrives after a life given one sustained description. Enoch's relationship with God precedes the mystery at the edge of his years and supplies the only context Genesis gives for understanding it. The order cannot be reversed. Enoch does not first encounter an astonishing end and then receive the description of one who walked with God. He walks with God through the long substance of his life. Only afterward does the total close. His distinction is therefore rooted in character before consequence. At 365, Enoch has completed fewer years than any patriarch whose total has yet been stated. Yet he has received more concentrated attention for the direction of those years than men who lived nearly 9 centuries. The contrast reaches its full force at the threshold. Around him stands a family marked by endurance. Seth has lived 857 years, Enoch 752, Cain 662, Mahalalel 592, Jared 527. Behind them lies Adam's completed span of 930. Before Enoch stands Methuselah at 300, already old by later human standards, yet still near the beginning of his antediluvian life. Enoch occupies the narrow space between those vast numbers with a total of 365. The number has been completed. His fatherhood has been recorded. His other children have been acknowledged. The full period of his walk with God has passed. The genealogy has arrived at the place where it closes a man's account. The familiar words are due. And he died. But the line extending from Enoch had already moved forward. Methuselah was 187 years old when he fathered Lamech. By then, Methuselah had spent nearly 2 centuries inside a family of extraordinary generational depth. Adam remained alive. So did Seth, Enoch, Cain, Mahalalel, Jared, and Enoch. Lamech entered the world as the 9th named generation from Adam through Seth, born beneath 8 direct ancestors who were all still living. The human beginning and the approaching age of Noah now occupied the earth at the same time. Adam had reached 874 years when Lamech was born. His remaining time was growing short, but he had lived to see the selected descent extend through another child. Lamech's arrival also changed Methuselah's place within the line. The son born when Enoch was 65 had become a father himself. Life had passed through Enoch into Methuselah, and through Methuselah into Lamech, while Enoch's 300-year walk with God was still underway. Methuselah's fatherhood therefore began beneath the example that distinguished his own father's life. He did not receive only a name and biological descent from Enoch. His first 187 years unfolded within the period Genesis describes as Enoch's walk with God. The genealogy now held three closely joined generations: Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech. Enoch's years would be the briefest among them. Methuselah's would become the longest recorded in Scripture. Lamech's total would end at a number unlike the surrounding patriarchs. Their spans differed dramatically, but each occupied the same continuing descent. Lamech's name had also appeared earlier in Cain's line. As with Enoch, the repeated name identifies a different man. Cain's descendant Lamech was the husband of Ada and Zillah, the father of Jabal, Jubal, Tubal-Cain, and Naamah, and the speaker who boasted that he had killed a man for wounding him. Methuselah's son Lamech belonged to Seth's branch. His father was Methuselah, his grandfather Enoch, and his later words would express longing for relief rather than pride in retaliation. The contrast between the two Lamechs is preserved by their lineages and their speech. One invoked Cain's vengeance and magnified it. The other would name a son while looking for comfort under the curse upon the ground. For now, Lamech was simply the newest child in the selected descent. Methuselah lived another 782 years after fathering him. During that immense span, he fathered other sons and daughters. His household expanded far beyond the one son named in the direct line. Lamech grew among siblings, while other branches spread from Methuselah through the antediluvian population. Yet Genesis keeps Lamech in view because the route toward Noah passes through him. Methuselah's remaining centuries carried him across one of the greatest transformations in the living structure of Adam's family. At Lamech's birth, 8 named ancestors stood above the child. By the end of Methuselah's life, every generation before him had disappeared from the living line. Adam died first when Lamech was 56. That death removed the first man after Lamech had shared the world with him for more than half a century. Seth then became the oldest surviving patriarch. The other older generations continued. Jared was still Methuselah's grandfather. Enoch was his father. Lamech remained a young descendant within a family whose roots were still living. But the centuries would steadily reverse that arrangement. The genealogy has already placed Enoch at the boundary of his 365 years, long before the totals of the men surrounding him. Whatever final language closes his account, the earthly span itself is complete, while Methuselah is 300 and Lamech is 113. Methuselah's own life continues. That continuation creates the most dramatic contrast between father and son in the genealogy's numbers. Enoch's entire count ends at 365. Methuselah lives 669 years beyond the point at which his father's total is complete. More than 6.5 centuries separate the boundaries of their earthly spans. The difference makes Methuselah's life an extended bridge. He carries the descent received from Enoch through generations that will outlive nearly every patriarch before them. His father's brief count does not cut off the line. Lamech is already present, and Methuselah remains for centuries after him. When Seth reaches 912 and dies, Methuselah is 355 and Lamech 168. Enoch becomes the oldest living member of the selected branch. Methuselah now stands with fewer generations above him, but his place is still far from the head of the family. Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, and Jared remain. Lamech soon reaches the age at which his own decisive act in the genealogy occurs. He is 182 years old when he fathers a son. The birth extends the selected line into the 10th named generation from Adam. The child enters while Enoch is still alive, followed by Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Methuselah, and Lamech. The descent now reaches from the generation associated with the first invocation of the Lord to an infant whose life will stand at the threshold of the flood. Lamech names him Noah. The act of naming becomes an interpretation of the world into which the child has been born. Lamech says, Out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. His words reach back across the entire human story. The ground had been cursed because of Adam's disobedience. What once yielded food within the abundance of Eden now answered human labor with resistance. Thorns and thistles accompanied cultivation. Bread came through sweat. Human vocation continued, but it continued under pain. Cain's judgment had intensified his own alienation from that same ground. Abel's blood entered it, and the soil no longer yielded its strength to the brother who had murdered him. Cain answered, wandering by building a city, while his descendants developed ways of managing animals, music, and metal. Those accomplishments enabled human life to continue, but none removed the curse Lamech now names. 9 generations after Adam, the pain of working the ground remains immediate. It has not become an ancient theological memory, with little effect on daily life. Lamech describes our work and the painful toil of our hands. The burden belongs to the living generation. His words include the wider household in that hardship. He does not speak only of his private labor. This one shall bring us relief. The longing is communal. Human beings need comfort from a condition shared across Adam's descendants. The name Noah sounds like the Hebrew word for rest or relief. Lamech binds the child's identity to expectation. He looks at his son and places hope upon the future that may come through him. This is the first recorded speech in Seth's genealogy since Eve named Seth, and the account noted that people began calling upon the Lord. Its tone differs sharply from the last preserved speech in Cain's branch. Cain's Lamech addressed his wives to celebrate lethal retaliation. Methuselah's son speaks over a child in hope of comfort. One Lamech answered injury by killing. The other confronts a burden no act of vengeance can solve. The enemy in his speech is not a young man who struck him, but the painful condition under which all human labor proceeds. One claimed the power to multiply punishment. The other admits the need for relief. The contrast reveals the different direction of the two family records without pretending that Seth's descendants live free from Adam's consequence. Lamech belongs to the branch associated with calling upon the Lord, yet his hands still ache from labor on cursed ground. Worship has not turned the world outside Eden into an easy place. His hope is focused on Noah. At the moment of the child's birth, the exact form of the promised relief remains ahead. The words express expectation, not yet fulfillment. Noah will indeed occupy the central place in the crisis approaching humanity, but Lamech's naming does not itself disclose every consequence of Noah's life. It does establish the pressure under which that life begins. The world is old enough to contain cities, organized herding, music, metalwork, immense families, and overlapping generations. It is also weary. Human beings have multiplied, and so has the labor required to sustain life from resistant soil. The curse pronounced upon the ground still shapes what hands must do each day. Lamech's hope does not look toward another technique alone. His family already inhabits a world rich in human invention. He names the Lord as the one who cursed the ground and expresses hope that this particular child will bring comfort from its burden. Noah is therefore introduced through longing before he is introduced through action. He is the son expected to bring relief. Methuselah becomes a grandfather with Noah's birth. The descent he received from Enoch has now passed through Lamech into another generation. Methuselah is 369 years old, Lamech 182, and Noah newly born. The family line remains crowded above them. Enoch is 874, Kenan 784, Mahalalel 714, and Jared 649. Several generations still separate Noah from the oldest living patriarch. Then those generations begin to close. Enoch dies when Noah is 84. Kenan follows when Noah is 179. Mahalalel dies when Noah is 234. Jared, whose life reaches 962 years, dies when Noah is 366. With each death, Methuselah moves nearer to the oldest place in the selected line. The son of Enoch outlives every named ancestor before him. His own extraordinary lifespan continues while Noah grows toward the age at which his household will become central to the survival of human and animal life. Methuselah's total reaches 969 years. No other lifespan recorded in Scripture is longer. He has lived 782 years after Lamech's birth, fathering sons and daughters, and watching the line extend through Noah. His years exceed Adam's by 39, Jared's by 7, and his father Enoch's by 604. Yet the greatest recorded number still reaches an end. Methuselah dies. His death confirms what every other long lifespan has already shown. No accumulation of years becomes eternal life by sheer duration. 969 years can delay the final boundary beyond every other recorded human span, but they cannot remove it. The line survives because Lamech and Noah are already present. Methuselah passes forward the descent of the man who walked with God, and his life stretches until the age in which Noah will face the world's great crisis. But the hope attached to Noah's name is still unresolved. The child expected to bring relief has grown beneath a sky shared with ancient patriarchs. The ground remains cursed. Human hands continue their painful labor. Death continues to remove even the longest-lived men. Lamech's words remain over his son. This one shall bring us relief. Before Methuselah reached his final year, Lamech's own life had closed. He had lived 595 years after the birth of Noah, fathering other sons and daughters. His total came to 777 years. The father, who had looked to Noah for relief from painful labor, did not live to see the great crisis that would define his son's generation. Lamech died 5 years before Methuselah. His words remained behind him, attached to the name he had given his son. Noah carried both the burden and the expectation into the closing years of the antediluvian world. When Noah reached 500 years of age, he became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The genealogy does not extend the selected line through only one of them at this point. All 3 are named because all 3 will belong to the household upon which the future of humanity will depend. The family record that began with Adam has reached a father and 3 sons, standing near a judgment that will engulf their world. Noah's age also marks the growing pressure of time. His father is still alive when the sons are born. His grandfather Methuselah is still alive. Jared has already died, and the generations before Jared are gone. The vast living chain that once reached from Adam to Lamech has narrowed to 3 older levels of the same family: Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah, followed by Noah's sons. Then Lamech dies. 5 years later, Methuselah dies at 969. Noah is 600 by the time his grandfather's extraordinary lifespan closes. Every named patriarch before him has now completed his earthly years. Adam, Seth, Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Methuselah, and Lamech are gone from the living line. Noah remains with Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The genealogy has carried the family safely through 10 generations, but its success in preserving descent cannot protect the surrounding world from what human life has become. People are multiplying across the face of the ground, just as the blessing of creation had commanded. Daughters are born among them. Households expand, the earth fills. Yet multiplication does not lead automatically to faithfulness. Genesis now describes a disturbing development. The sons of God see that the daughters of humanity are beautiful, and they take wives for themselves from whomever they choose. The identity of these sons of God has long been understood in different ways. They have been read as heavenly beings, as powerful rulers, or as men from a particular human line. The account leaves the expression compact, but the action it emphasizes is plain. They see, they desire, and they take according to their own choice. The language recalls an older pattern of rebellion. In Eden, the woman saw that the forbidden tree was good for food and desirable, and she took its fruit. Here, powerful figures see women as desirable and take whomever they choose. Desire becomes possession, and possession is governed by the will of the taker. Marriage, given as a bond in which man and woman become one flesh, is described in the language of acquisition without restraint. The multiplying human world is not merely growing, power is being used to satisfy appetite. The Lord responds by declaring a limit. My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. Humanity's condition is brought back into view. People may build, rule, marry, and produce renowned offspring, but they remain flesh. Their life depends upon God and cannot continue indefinitely in defiance of Him. The 120 years place human existence under a divine boundary. The declaration has been understood both as a limit associated with human lifespan and as the period remaining before judgment. Within the movement toward the flood, it sounds unmistakably as restraint. God will not allow the present corruption to continue without end. Human beings have acted as though desire and strength authorize whatever they can take. God announces that their days remain in His hands. The Nephilim are on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God go into the daughters of humanity, and children are born to them. These offspring become the mighty men of old, men of renown. The world admires strength and remembers names. Its celebrated figures possess power great enough to distinguish them from ordinary people. Their fame survives in the phrase, men of renown. But renown is not the verdict that governs the story. Genesis shifts the point of view away from what human beings celebrate and toward what the Lord sees. The Lord sees that the wickedness of humanity is great upon the earth. The statement is comprehensive. Evil has not remained confined to Cain's field, Lamech's song, or the taking of women by the powerful. It has spread across human life until wickedness itself is described as great. The corruption reaches inward as well as outward. Every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart is only evil continually. The problem is no longer a single forbidden act or one outbreak of anger. Human imagination, the inner forming of intentions, plans, and desires, has become persistently directed toward evil. Actions arise from a moral condition that operates day after day. Every inclination leaves no protected region of human planning untouched. Only evil identifies its direction, continually identifies its duration. Humanity has filled the earth, but the earth is being filled by people whose inner purposes are bent toward corruption. The blessing of multiplication remains visible in numbers, while the purpose of human life under God is being abandoned. This is the world Noah's household inhabits. Cities, tents, herds, music and metalwork have all become established parts of human life. Mighty men have gained reputations. Families have multiplied across generations. None of that prevents the heart from becoming corrupt. Human civilization has not cured the violence that began with Cain. Greater organization has simply given human desire a larger world in which to act. Skill can shape materials, but it cannot make the human heart righteous. Fame can preserve a warrior's name, but it cannot change what God sees. The Lord regrets that He has made humanity on the earth, and He is grieved to His heart. The words reveal no detached observer watching the consequences from a distance. Human evil brings divine sorrow. The Creator who made humanity in His likeness now sees that humanity's thoughts have become continually opposed to His good order. The regret is the grief of God confronting the ruin of creatures he made. It does not suggest that humanity's corruption escaped his knowledge or overpowered his purpose. It expresses the real moral response of the Creator to what human beings have chosen to become. The grief reaches to his heart, answering the corruption within the human heart. Humanity's inward purposes are continually evil. God's inward response is profound sorrow. That sorrow does not remain emotion without consequence. The Lord declares, "I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them." The sentence reverses the movement of creation. God had formed humanity from the ground and placed living creatures within an ordered world. He had blessed male and female and commanded them to multiply. Now the life filling the ground has become so corrupt that God announces its removal from the ground's surface. The language of blotting out suggests erasure. Humanity has attempted to establish permanence through cities, descendants, achievements, and famous names. God's judgment will show how fragile that permanence is. What human beings have spread across the earth can be swept from it by the Creator who gave it life. The judgment extends beyond humanity to the land animals, creeping things, and birds. Human rebellion has consequences for the created order placed under human responsibility. The world entrusted to Adam's descendants suffers under the judgment their corruption brings. The ground itself has remained central from the beginning. Adam was formed from it. Because of his sin, it was cursed. Abel's blood cried from it. Cain lost its strength and became a wanderer. Lamech worked it with painful hands and hoped Noah would bring relief from its burden. Now humanity faces removal from its face. The place meant to sustain human life has become the stage of human violence. The relationship between people and ground, damaged outside Eden, has reached a terminal crisis. God's declaration gives that crisis a definite outcome. Human wickedness will not continue indefinitely. The powerful will not take forever. The renowned will not preserve themselves through their names. The multiplying population will not overwhelm divine judgment by its size. The Creator will act. At this point, the genealogies' long spans assume a different meaning. For generations, centuries of life had displayed patience. Adam's descendants received time to form households, develop skills, call upon the Lord, and extend the human family. Even lives exceeding 900 years were permitted to run their course. That time has been used to spread corruption. The problem is not that humanity has failed to become impressive. The antediluvian world is full of accomplishment and reputation. Its failure is that the creatures made to live under God's blessing have filled their thoughts and actions with evil. The judgment therefore approaches at the level of creation itself. The world of Adam's descendants is not facing another local exile like Cain's removal to Nod. It is not facing the loss of one person, one household, or one city. God speaks of humanity and the creatures sharing its world being blotted from the ground. Noah's 3 sons now stand within the generation threatened by that decree. Their father had been named in hope of comfort, but the need for comfort has expanded far beyond relief from exhausting labor. The entire human world is under sentence. Noah has inherited the same flesh, the same ground, and the same mortality as the people around him. He belongs to the line passing through Adam, Seth, Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech. Genealogy alone does not place him beyond judgment. Every human being descends from the humanity God now condemns. The story has reached the edge of universal destruction. Then one sentence interrupts the verdict. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. The favor granted to Noah would preserve a household through the judgment ahead. Yet long before Noah stood in that corrupt generation, His ancestor Enoch had already reached the boundary where his own account seemed destined to close. His years totaled 365. The genealogy had arrived at the customary ending. Enoch had lived, fathered Methuselah, walked with God for 300 years, and fathered other sons and daughters. His earthly span had been counted in full. But Genesis does not say, "and he died." It says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The rhythm breaks. Every completed patriarchal life around Enoch is closed by death. His is closed by an act of God. Enoch does not seize and escape, discover a hidden path, or master the mortality inherited from Adam. God takes him. The wording first describes the result as absence. Enoch was not. The man who had occupied a known place within Jared's household, fathered children, and lived among generations of Adam's descendants, was no longer there. His disappearance did not mean that his family line had been erased. Methuselah remained, already 300 years old. Enoch's other sons and daughters remained. Jared, his father, remained alive for centuries. The household continued, but Enoch could no longer be found within it. Then Genesis gives the reason. God had taken him. That explanation places the disappearance within the relationship that defined Enoch's life. The God with whom he walked is the one who acts at its earthly boundary. The ending is extraordinary, but it is not disconnected from the 300 years preceding it. Enoch's departure comes as the final consequence of a life lived with God. The subject of the decisive action is God. Adam's descendants can build cities, preserve names, forge metals, cultivate the ground, and extend their families through centuries. None can remove himself from death. Enoch's ending is therefore not a human achievement placed above the accomplishments of Cain's line. It is divine action toward a man whose life pleased God. Nor does Genesis describe Enoch moving to another region, becoming the founder of a hidden settlement, or withdrawing into an unknown community. His absence receives a complete explanation in the text's own terms. He was no longer present because God took him. The force of that statement depends upon everything the genealogy has established. Adam's death confirmed the sentence of Eden. Seth's death showed it passing to the next generation. Enoch, Canaan, and Mahalalel followed. Jared, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah belonged to the same mortal succession. The length of their lives may be astonishing, but everyone remains under death. Then Enoch's account interrupts the refrain. His distinction is not that he lived longer than others. He lived far fewer years. It is not that he left more descendants or a more imposing human legacy. The genealogy records his children without attaching cities or inventions to them. It is not that he stood at the head of the family. 5 older patriarchs were still alive when his earthly years ended. His distinction is that he walked with God, and God took him. The outcome does not abolish mortality for the rest of the family. Jared remains and eventually dies. Methuselah remains for another 669 years and dies. Lamech dies. The antediluvian world moves toward judgment, and Noah's favor will preserve him through the flood rather than remove him from earthly danger before it arrives. Enoch's departure is personal and exceptional. It does not turn the genealogy into a line of people who evade death through descent or imitation. It establishes that death, though governing Adam's children, does not govern God. That is the climax contained in the few words Genesis gives him. The man who walked with God reaches the point where every other account says that the man died. Instead, God takes him. Centuries pass, the flood generation comes, and the world Enoch knew disappears. Yet his name does not vanish with it. When the books of Chronicles open Israel's genealogical record, they begin by compressing the earliest descent into a succession of names: Adam, Seth, Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, then Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Enoch remains exactly where Genesis placed him. Chronicles gives no independent adventure to the name. It preserves his position. He is still Jared's son, Methuselah's father, and a member of the line leading from Adam to Noah. The brief list protects the identity that mattered from the beginning. Cain's Enoch cannot be substituted for him. The man who vanished is embedded in Seth's branch. That preservation also ensures that Enoch's extraordinary ending remains attached to human history. He is not remembered as a figure floating outside genealogy. He belongs between named generations. His departure was unusual. His identity was concrete. Much later, Luke records the ancestry of Jesus and carries it backward beyond Abraham, beyond Noah, and into the antediluvian world. The line passes from Noah to Lamech, from Lamech to Methuselah, from Methuselah to Enoch, then through Jared, Mahalalel, Kenan, Enosh, Seth, and Adam, whom Luke calls the Son of God. Once again, Enoch occupies the same place. Luke's genealogy places the man taken by God within the ancestral history that ultimately reaches Jesus. Enoch's brief Genesis account has not made him irrelevant to the later biblical story. His name endures as one link in the human descent through which the genealogy of Christ is traced all the way back to Adam and to God. But Hebrews does more than preserve Enoch's place. It interprets his disappearance. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. The mystery at the end of Genesis is stated plainly. Enoch did not see death. The missing death formula was not an accidental variation or a delicate way of reporting an ordinary burial. Hebrews understands Genesis as describing a transfer accomplished by God. Enoch was taken from earthly life without passing through the death that closed the accounts around him. He could not be found. That detail gives human form to the absence Genesis records. Enoch had been present within a family, and then he was beyond human recovery. No search could reverse what God had done. The explanation did not lie in a place where Enoch had concealed himself. It lay in the will of the God who took him. Hebrews then gives the verdict that preceded the event. Before Enoch was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. Genesis says that Enoch walked with God. Hebrews expresses the divine assessment of that walk. Enoch pleased him. The approval belongs to the life before the disappearance. Enoch's departure did not retroactively turn an ordinary course into a faithful one. Across those 300 years, he lived in a way commended by God. The taking revealed the significance of a relationship already sustained. Hebrews locates that relationship in faith. Faith is not presented as a method Enoch used to force an extraordinary reward from God. It is the basis of the life that pleased God. Without faith, it is impossible to please him, Hebrews continues. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Enoch's walk, therefore, becomes a canonical example of drawing near to God in trust. He believed the God with whom he walked, and his life received divine approval before its astonishing end. The reward was not something Enoch took for himself. Hebrews retains the same direction of action as Genesis. God took him. Faith explains Enoch's Godward life. God explains Enoch's disappearance. That witness gives Enoch an enduring place among people who trusted God before receiving the full outcome of his promises. His 365 years become more significant than the immense totals around him, because their worth is measured by divine approval. Yet Enoch's canonical legacy is not confined to his own deliverance. Jude identifies him with the same genealogical precision. Enoch, the seventh from Adam. Then Jude presents him as a prophet announcing the coming judgment of God. Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all, and to convict all the ungodly of all their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him. This prophetic presentation belongs to Enoch's later canonical reception. It does not expand the Genesis narrative into a detailed ministry or place later Enochic scenes inside that ancient genealogy. Jude uses Enoch's witness to address the certainty of divine judgment. The man taken from the world is remembered speaking to the world about the Lord's coming. That warning fits the direction in which Genesis moves after him. Human corruption becomes great upon the earth. The thoughts of the human heart become continually evil. The Creator is grieved, and judgment is announced. Enoch's own departure does not mean God will simply remove every faithful person while allowing violence to reign forever. The God who rewards those who seek him also comes to judge ungodliness. Jude's language is relentless because the rebellion it confronts is not superficial. Deeds, methods, and defiant words are all brought under judgment. Human renown cannot conceal them. Power cannot protect them. The Lord comes with authority to expose and convict. Enoch's canonical witness therefore holds together two truths that his story might otherwise allow people to separate. God knows the person who walks with him, and God sees the world that resists him. Enoch is taken, the ungodly are judged, faith is rewarded, rebellion is answered. The man's disappearance displays divine power over death, while his warning displays divine authority over evil. That does not make Enoch the central actor in the flood or assign him a role in Noah's deliverance. His earthly span ended centuries before the waters came. Noah received his own favor, command, and responsibility in his own generation. Enoch's place is earlier and more concentrated. He stands inside the genealogy where death appears invincible. He lives fewer years than the patriarchs around him. He walks with God through family life and changing generations. Then, at the point where the inherited sentence should close his account, God acts. The generations continue without him. Jared remains. Methuselah grows ancient. Lamech names Noah. Humanity fills the earth, and corruption brings the world toward judgment. But the empty place Enoch leaves in Jared's household never receives the words expected over it. There is no "and he died." There is only the brief record of a completed walk, a man no longer found, and the God who took him.